The war for the Pirate King is about to begin. And leading the charge is professional rubberman and meat enthusiast Monkey D. Luffy. Meanwhile, right behind, in front, or even above him, is veteran war stopper and social drinker redhead Shanks. However, lurking in the thick bushes is a man who likes to live dangerously, specifically by keeping all three of his guns alarmingly close to his groin. It is, of course, Blackbeard. 3 emperors with the strength and will to govern all pirates. But they were all of them deceived, for another emperor was made. Deep in the land of wherever he lives, one red nose rose above all, into whom Crocodile poured his cruelty, malice, and will to dominate all life. The sum of which resulting in crafting the monstrously popular Buggy. One of these 4 figures will become the next Pirate King. One king to rule them all. But then something happened that Oda did not intend. A last-minute decision during the initial Sabari arc to create 9 new characters, each of whom rivaling the protagonistic desires of our Monkey Man. And on the very shores of Laugh Tale, all of these figures will be brought together to fight for the right to call themselves the next #1 pirate guy. And here's the thing, it's not going to be Luffy. Or maybe it will be. That was probably a bit overly dramatic of me. It is a given that Luffy will eventually become the Pirate King, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to become the next Pirate King. Ever since the 19th of July, 1997, chapter 1, page 46, it has been Luffy's undisputed dream to become the Pirate King. That's been the main driving force of the series. The reason why we've spent the last 25 years gathering this menagerie of skeletons, fish, and moss heads. Because each of them are integral to achieving Luffy's dream in some way, shape, or form. However, at the 1060 chapter mark, it was finally confirmed that Luffy is something of a dream polygamist, and that he has been hiding a secret dream. One in which becoming the Pirate King is only the first step towards achieving. So someone else achieving the title before Luffy doesn't necessarily take anything away from him. If anything, it would give Luffy a much clearer goal. A simple, singular entity to punch fight his way to glory. So think of it this way. We could have a situation similar to that of Hamlet and Claudius, or their better known version, Simba and Scar. Simba was born to be king, however Scar, well, he was a bit of a prick. He then committed caticide against Mufasa, and commandeered the role of king until Simba was ready to take it back. It's a very common story, ever so common. In fact, you let me know in the comments if your uncle has ever usurped your father's throne. Back to fictional alliance, picture Simba fighting Scar on Pride Rock, except instead of big kitties, it's a monkey repeatedly punching a hippo. Because I actually think that the next most likely Pirate King is Blackbeard, who is canonically depicted as a hippo through this phenomenal One Piece figure line. Now, statistically speaking, Blackbeard is a 40-year-old Armada commander who stands at a towering 344 centimeters with a bounty of lots and a chest hairier than an exposed lemon after having been rolled across a barbershop floor. The dude has everything he needs to get that job done. But there's a bit of a common misconception that Blackbeard has never said that his goal is to become the Pirate King, despite the fact that Blackbeard has done the thing that people says he hasn't, and did state that he was going to become the Pirate King. That doesn't mean it's his ultimate ambition though. Much like Luffy, being the reigning monarch of the Pirate Kingdom may just be another phase in Blackbeard's master plan to turn the world into a big cherry pie and then eat it. And whilst Blackbeard taking the crown might seem a bit subversive to most, I actually think that this would be the most straightforward narrative maneuver that Oda could possibly pull, because it plays into the classic "it's always darkest before dawn" trope of storytelling, which is intriguingly mirrored by the idea that Blackbeard represents literal darkness and Luffy represents more metaphorical and perhaps even literal dawn. They said even twice. That's how much dawn he represents. To achieve maximum despair and underdoggedness, it would be great for Luffy to be smacked right in the dream balls. Not only did Blackbeard engineer a series of events that killed Luffy's brother, but now Blackbeard has even gone so far as to kill Luffy's dream. But because it's One Piece, nothing actually dies. The dream is resurrected and our hippo friend is gonna take a whopping L from this raging D. It's your very classic hero's journey stuff. Luffy is going to be tested like never before, and having to reconcile with his dream being in the chubsome hands of someone else is that make or break moment when Luffy rises from the ashes. That is of course assuming that Luffy and Blackbeard are the only 2 contenders in this war, which would be a very poor assumption to make. Our third potential scallywag supreme, and right now probably the front runner in the eyes of the world, is Shanks. Granted, currently he is the only emperor who has never said, "I will be the Pirate King, dude," but he has well and truly declared his intent to compete in the race for the One Piece. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the race is even slightly to horrendously rigged in his favor. Shanks started at the finish line. He almost certainly already knows where Laugh Tale is. He didn't need to worry about finding all sorts of obscure cubes, saving samurai, or visiting Grandma's cake house, which honestly good for him because that would have been the most awkward version of Little Red Riding Hood. Shanks would have gotten to the house and discovered that instead of the wolf eating Grandma had a bit of a hunger tantrum and ate a wolf. Doesn't matter. Shanks got to skip that arc in his life, and the only reason why he isn't currently the Pirate King is because it's not time yet. Whatever the One Piece is, it's in need of a bit of a temporal safe space because it's very time sensitive. As such, after Kaido's defeat on Wano, Shanks checked the clock and he said, "Goodness me, look at the time," and promptly set sail to do the thing after a quick stop home to deal with a rather frustrating rooster. One of the things I love about Shanks actively competing for the One Piece is that if he was to become the next Pirate King, then it's very in keeping with the general themes of One Piece. Because then the line of succession would be first Roger, then Red Roger, and finally Monkey Roger. Shanks does have quite a bit of baggage to deal with though. In fact, he has a unique relationship with each and every one of his fellow emperors. But here is a crazy fact about Shanks that you probably didn't know. He's only appeared on 5 volume covers in the entire history of One Piece, which happens to be the exact same amount of volume covers that Blackbeard has appeared on. And they also just so happen to be the exact same volumes. Those being volume 25, 45, 59, 95, and 96. Shanks and Blackbeard are like a One Piece power couple. The not necessarily sexual tension is palpable. Blackbeard is always on Shanks's mind, as well as always on his face due to the whole Scar situation. But this is no one-sided infatuation, because Blackbeard, like the true player he is, has his own plans to take on Shanks eventually. And a colossal part of this war is going to center on the conflict between them. And I'm afraid the only way this fight ends well is if Shanks is revealed to be the true protagonist of One Piece, and we've been following a side story this entire time. Otherwise, he's dead. Mentors die. That's just what they do. In fact, if you currently mentor someone, then I would watch out, because you may end up being someone else's character development. Although Shanks did once say to Roger regarding Laugh Tale, "If we're gonna go there, we'll take our own ship someday." The we in this situation, as well as the one responsible for weeing himself in many future situations, being of course Buggy the Clown. I want to ask this right now. Is there any One Piece fan out there in the somewhere who still does not believe that Buggy has a fantastic chance of becoming the Pirate King? I will say that when I was originally planning this video, Buggy's role was going to be replaced by Crocodile, because he's the one with the cunning, the drive, and profound desire to become the Pirate King. But then I thought to myself, nah, all of the work that Crocodile puts into achieving his dream is going to be directly funneled into the legacy of Buggy. Buggy is like a clout tampon. He will absorb everything. And when it comes down to it, Buggy ending up at the pinnacle of the pirate universe due to a series of wacky accidents would be by far the most hilarious outcome the series could deliver. If that did happen, I can picture myself reacting the same way that Roger did when he found Laugh Tale. He laughed, which is a very appropriate reaction because making people laugh is literally the only job of the clown. But let's just stop a bit and take this a bit more seriously, because lol funny joke isn't the only reason why Buggy could end up winning this war. In the same way that Luffy has Zoro and Sanji, Buggy has his own unwilling wings in Crocodile and Mihawk. One of the smartest as well as one of the most single powerful beings in the entire One Piece world. But I would also argue that Buggy has a crew far more loyal than any other emperor. The Grand Fleet, yeah, they're pretty great. I'm sure the Red Hair Pirates also have the utmost respect for Shanks. And Blackbeard's crew, well, whatever they've got going seems to work for them. But nobody commands sheer adoration like Buggy the Clown. In fact, it's so powerful that it's actively out of his control. This crew will make Buggy the Pirate King whether he likes it or not. He just so happened to does want it, however, as during the Paramount War saga, Buggy predicted his own future by stating that he would become an emperor and after that go on to become the Pirate King. And as for where he sits in this war, it's a very intriguing place. Given both he and Mihawk's relationship with Shanks, I feel like they would be one of the more unlikely clashes. However, just as Shanks has a hot date with Blackbeard, our Cross Guild could be gearing up to cross paths with the Straw Hats. Crocodile already has an established poor rapport with them, plus Zoro, he is going to chop fight Mihawk at some point. But the most exciting possibility is watching the sky split when the genius jester meets God Usopp. Someone pointed this out to me the other day, but Buggy and Usopp have never met. And after realizing that, it's become one of the things that I want most in this world. Because the two of them will definitely have heard of each other. The 500 million berry god Usopp, who was instrumental in bringing down Doflamingo, comes face to face with Emperor Buggy in a battle of bluffing. Both of them would be terrified of each other, but also doing what they do best and lying their way through it. That aside, I do think that Buggy has a fantastic chance of becoming the Pirate King at some stage in the series. However, I don't know if he will be the next king or even a king before Luffy. He seems more like post-king material. Buggy has a bit of a tendency to lap up those sloppy seconds, and he only gains a title once it's lost the vast majority of its previous meaning. So if he is to become king, it's probably only going to be once that title is rendered irrelevant. To our left field contenders, the ones who aren't emperors, that's you, kid, They have big words and big dreams, but no single one of them is capable of forming a faction big enough to compete at this late stage. Having just made fun of him, honestly, the closest would be Kid. With a 3 billion berry bounty, he could raise an arm or two, which is more than the amount of actual arms he can raise. But the only reason why I throw Junkyard Shanks into the ring is because he does have the Luffy-esque drive, grit, and one-track mindedness to continue pursuing this goal. I feel like his best chance would be to somehow unite what's left of the worst generation into a singular globby group. However, there's not a lot of them left. Luffy, Zoro, and Blackbeard already spoken for. Hawkins might be dead. Drake, well, he is a marine. Scratchman Apu is a traitorous bunglenut, and it's very difficult to see a world where Law decides to work with, let alone work for, Kid. Which leaves us with Capone, Arouge, and Bonnie. The former two, I suppose I could see being reasonable Kid allies. But regardless of how ill-advised it may be, Kid is going to make a play here. Which means that we will have at least 5 factions battling it out for Laugh Tale. And there's even the potential that multiple captains will find the One Piece at the same time. What would that mean? Are we crowning multiple kings and then starting some sort of inter-king conflict? Sort of like a pirate civil war? I'm afraid the only person who knows the answer to that is one very, very large bird. This is the strangest Mihawk theory you have ever seen. In fact, it might even be just the strangest theory you've ever seen, full stop. But the truth is often stranger than fiction, even if it is fictional pirate truth. And in 3 short steps, I am going to convince you that Dracula Mihawk is not what he seems, and he is in fact a completely different kind of something. Notice how I said something instead of someone? That's foreshadowing. Speaking of strange truths, this video came about because both I and another YouTuber named Parvision stumbled upon the same idea that Vanderdecken is a literal mushroom. I have a whole video on Dude in a Room explaining that situation if you care, but in recognition of our mutual madness, this is something of a collaboration. You can see the original idea on his channel. It goes into a lot of the finer details, and you can even hit that funky red subscribe button while you're there, because he's a pretty cool dude. Plus, here's the video cited in APA just to make sure that there's no credit confusion this time. But step 1 for blowing your Mihawk mind brains. All objects have a will. One Piece is a strange series for many, many reasons, but one that always sticks out to me is the fact that Roger was able to eavesdrop on conversations between rather large stone cubes. The voice of all things, like literally all of the things have a voice, and some people can hear them. Now in reality, that would be cause for concern, but in One Piece, that makes you the Pirate King. This extends further into the concept of the breath of all things, which famously allowed Zoro to cut steel due to the rather creepy concept that all objects were breathing heavily onto him. But also many objects have unique personalities. Eiichiro Oda loves personification and has given personalities to a wide range of items, including Luffy's straw hat, Kaido's club, and even Yamato's side boob. Granted, these are mostly for comical effect. Or are they? Well, yes, obviously, but things can be both funny and relevant at the same time. It's like the entire premise of my channel, I hope. For example, Oda's personified Wado Ichimonji takes on the appearance of a young Shimotsuki Kozaburo, the man who crafted both it and Enma. Now, we currently have yet to see Enma personified. Or have we? Look, maybe. One of the big mysteries remaining after the end of Onigashima was the Grim Reaper encountered by Zoro. Now, the popular train of thought at the moment is either 1, Zoro would be trippin', or 2, that this is the spirit, will, or personification of Enma manifesting. And Parvision in his video mentions that this thought is starting to taste a bit like bleach, which, isn't great, because that's a substance that humans should not ingest. But this leads nicely into step 2 of our 3-part master plan to ruin your mind brain, which is, objects can come to life. Putting Enma aside for a second, this bold statement is actually old news. Scientists like Vegapunk or hungry hag sorcerers like Big Mom have been finding ways to to imbue objects with life since long before your father decided to imbue your mother with you. However, Parvision pointed out something that I'd completely forgotten about, which is like a whole new layer of this delicious theory lasagna. And it's a starfish. His name is Papug. Say hi to Papug, please. And in One Piece chapter number, this one, Papug explains his origins as having believed he was a human when he was a child. However, by the time he found out that Gaspy was a starfish, it was too late to change. Going on to state, the mind is a powerful thing. In this world, you can do anything you put your mind to. Papug then went on to walk the talk that he'd been talking about and became a successful entrepreneur with his criminal brand, which Nami claims are sold for criminal prices. And something more recent that cements willpower as the greatest force of this world is obviously Gear 5th, which has brought up all kinds of questions about the power of the imagination and just how limitless one's potential is with the right willpowering it. Granted, Papug was never an object. He was always a living thing, but by that same logic, so are all of the other quote-unquote objects who factually have their own wills and personalities. And the obvious example of that is the Going Merry. That ship was 100% alive, and not only that, but it managed to manifest its own physical presence in the Club Ultimate, something that was able to physically repair and otherwise interact with the world. Merry had a very benevolent and caring personality. However, when we turn to the world of swords, things get a bit more volatile. The Sandai Kitetsu was famously referred to by Zoro as a quote problem child, and had a habit of throwing a bit of a hissy fit whenever most people tried to wield it, thus leading to it and the rest of the Kitetsu set being labeled as cursed. Zoro had to pass a very specific test for the Sandai Kitetsu to deem him worthy of using it for slice cutting. But that was nothing compared to Enma's test, because that sword, that allegedly inanimate object, was ready to kill Zoro if he was unworthy. So my conclusion is that 1, swords are pricks, and 2, the greater the quality of the sword, the more intense the test to wield the sword. And right now in the series, there is no greater sword than Drakeuil Mihawk's Yoru. Yoru is actually by far the most iconic sword in all of One Piece. Its impact on pop culture can be seen through the Man-at-Arms series deciding to forge a real Yoru, or even the crafty Transformer forging his own cardboard Yoru. In fact, the only people who weren't in awe of Yoru were 4 kids who decided to engage in the sword equivalent of circumcision by clipping down the crossguard, which I imagine was because of, crosses and Jesus and religion and such. But seeing Yoru like this is kind of like seeing a shaved German shepherd. You were once a fearsome looking wolfen boy, but now you're just a 6-piece bucket of family lulz. I hope you enjoyed that joke, because from here on out things are getting serious. Mr. Drakeuil Mihawk, if that is indeed your real name, you are not what you portray yourself to be, because all of our evidences bring us to step 3 of the master plan, which is the conclusion that Yoru is alive and Mihawk is actually a manifestation of the blade who exists to serve as a test to judge the swordsman worthy of wielding him. Okay, so I know I took some big leaps there. To be honest, it's because I thought having a 3-step plan sounded much better than having a 4 or 5-step plan. And having said that, now all I can think about is, what are you doing, step plan? But in mere minutes, all of this is going to be shockingly plausible. Because something that no one has ever done, to the best of my knowledge, is look at the series through the perspective of Yoru. POV, you're Yoru. You're the greatest sharp object in the world, and you've spent an awfully long time waiting for someone to be worthy of wielding you. However, each and every candidate that has found you has been disappointing, to the point where you, as a sword, start to believe that the only person good enough for you is you. Yoru gets so sick and tired and bored of waiting that it manifests itself in order to seek out a worthy swordsman. It comes to life, and just like a 13-year-old in their very first online game, it has to create a new name. In this case, let's say Dracula Van Hawkslayer 69, which, like all of our first handles, Yoru would come to regret and refine it to the more socially acceptable Drakeuil Mihawk. But the thing is, if you look at Mihawk with your eyes, the dude even looks like a sword. He has sharp eyesight, sharp facial hair, and of course is a superbly sharp dresser. Very interestingly, the word Yoru means night. So when Knight is choosing a home for himself, Kuragana Island as a perpetually dark and gloomy environment is perfection. I mean, it has everything. Darkness, mandrills, more darkness, and even an impossible toilet. Not that Yoru, as a sword, probably defecates anyway. No, he more than likely just leaves the toilet there to confuse the guests. But really, if I'm Yoru, then all I need right now is a well-endowed goth waifu by my side, and we're all set to go. Set to go out into the world and discover a worthy swordsman, that is. And I think we all know just who Yoru found. His fiercest rival, redhead Shanks. A swordsman whose duels with Mihawk sent echoes all throughout the Grand Line. Strong, skilled, and willed, everything was perfect. until it wasn't. After an incident involving a rubber boy, a mountain bandit, and a big ol' sea snake, Shanks returned to the Grand Line, or I should say, most of Shanks returned to the Grand Line. Roughly 10% of him remained behind in East Blue in the form of his left arm. And after this event, Yoru received what I can only imagine was the sword equivalent of blue balls. But why would that crush the idea of him challenging Shanks? I mean, the greatest swordsman in the world with one arm is still the world's greatest swordsman. Well, Parvision proposes it's because Yoru has a strict requirement that those who wield it must have two arms. Because to be fair, it is indeed a big boy sword and unlikely to reach its full potential just being swung-a-dung around one-handed. But after this, Yoru was distraught. He lost all hope of ever finding someone capable of passing its merciless test. And so he took up a position as a warlord of the sea and retired to a quiet life tending to his cabbage farming. Those cabbages, by the way, according to One Piece world logic, probably have wills and personalities of their own. I mean, just think about it this way. We all assume that Mihawk lives this very loner lifestyle. But in reality, Kurigana Island is absolutely packed with objects to talk to. Monkeys, cabbages, toilet. Mihawk has an abundance of friends around every corner. And yet he still feels ever so empty because he's not fulfilling his true purpose as a sword. And so every now and then he ventures fruitlessly into the Grand Line, doing a slice here and a chop there, until on one fatesome day, he encountered the future world's greatest swordsman. So Parvision now points to a series of great lines by Kozaburo, Ippomatsu, and even Zoro himself.
Let's read what Kozaburo said in chapter 1033 together real quick. He says, "A great blade can see into you. It chooses only the swordsman who best suits it." Then we get Ippomatsu saying, "A sword chooses its wielder."
And then Zoro said that Enma chose him and is now testing him. In much the same way that Yoru found Zoro on that day in the irrelevant waters of East Blue, the Great Blade saw into Zoro and sought to test him. And Zoro passed that initial test. A test to see if his spirit and willpower were worthy. I mean, obviously his everything else was lacking, but yeah, that's fine. We can fix that. After which Mihawk says, "Strive with your whole heart and mind to best this blade. Not best me, best this blade." To be fair, immediately after that, Mihawk says surpass me, so I don't think we should read too much into Mihawk's prior flowery language. But he was drawn to Zoro. He saw through Zoro, and he said that he would wait for Zoro, which is exactly the sort of thing that a sword would say. A few months later, Zoro would rock up on Mihawk's doorstep and beg to be trained. And Mihawk has a bit of a chuckle. He did a bit of a ho 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 ho. But this could not be more perfect. A sword not only testing its user, but actively training its user to wield it, which I actually imagine would have probably led to some unintentional homoeroticism with Mihawk saying stuff like, "No, Zoro-kun, this is how you must grip me."
Huh?
I mean, this is how you must grip the sword. The sword is what I meant. But the test for the world's greatest blade was so brutal that even after 2 years of training, Zoro was still not ready. And so Yoru continued to mill around, just, waiting patiently, having a bit of a fling with the goth waifu he'd previously wished for, and then subsequently being dumped by the world government and having to form an alliance with a clown. Your standard sword problems, really. We've all heard the story before. And speaking of problems, does this theory have any? Well, yes. Yeah. In fact, it has its own Santoriu's worth of problems. 1, we've seen Mihawk as a child. 2, we've seen Yoru personified by Oda. And 3, the idea of Zoro using a two-handed blade just feels a bit off. However, to those I say, 1, the Merry Manifestation was also a child, so perhaps they can mature in form. 2, the personification of Yoru may just be based on the person who crafted it, much like how Kozaburo made Enma, and yet its manifestation is potentially a Grim Reaper. And 3, I like Zoro and I like swords, so I'm generally just happy if Zoro was cutting things no matter what that blade is. And like person swords aside, I actually think it would be really cool to see Zoro use Yoru, even if it's only for a special and likely desperate occasion. But just to clarify, I do not take this idea seriously. Nor should anyone take what any One Piece YouTubers have to say seriously. Like, legit, we're all just dudes in rooms. It's a really cool idea, and the originator Parvision is a creator who specializes in having fun right on the border of plausibility. And in the end, One Piece isn't about the big epic reveals, the punch fighting, or the mysteries. It's about enjoying the journey and the friends we made along the way. And in this case, the friends Mihawk made along the way are monkeys, cabbages, and of course, good old toilet. Marineford 2.0 is happening. The greatest war in manga history is upon us, and we have a fair idea of how it's going to go down. Fun thing about One Piece that you may or may not have noticed, but all of the post-time skip arcs pretty directly mirror the pre-time skip arcs. For example, instead of traveling 10,000 meters up into the sky, we travel 10,000 meters down to the seafloor. Instead of stopping a reptilian warlord commandeering a kingdom, we need to liberate a kingdom already conquered by a bird warlord. Instead of having Robin blackmailed to leave the crew, we have Sanji, and so on and so on. on, and more, much more of that. I will say it's not a perfect mirror. Not everything plays out perfectly one-to-one, and some of the arcs do get mirrored out of order, and some arcs get mirrored in a big smushy mess together. However, it's a very clear trend that does give us some insight into the final saga. For example, let's take the very first post-time skip saga, Fishman Island, which is a fusion of East Blue and Skypiea. In the East Blue saga, we formed the crew, and in the Fishman Island saga, we reformed the crew. It serves as an introduction/reintroduction to our main cast, as well as a reaffirmation of purpose, with Luffy telling Rayleigh that he'll become the Pirate King, just as he proudly declared it to Shanks in Chapter 1. Except pre-time skip Luffy was angry and crying, whereas post-time skip Luffy was happy and smiling. And in fact, Rayleigh was the one crying, but you're going to see a lot of that, I will warn you right now. So much of post-time skip One Piece is focused on hitting those same story and character beats, just inverted. In addition to that, post-time skip is designed to create partner arcs that pay off the pre-time skip ones, such as Fishman Island bringing Arlong full circle, both metaphorically and literally, with Hody Jones serving as what Arlong would look like if he was indeed a full circle or perhaps even a sphere. So this mirror idea, it's not a new thought. It's something that we've been picking up on all throughout the post-time skip era. But I will say that most people try to equate Skypiea to Zoro because they're desperate to try and make it that perfect one-to-one mirror. But it's not, and Fishman Island is definitely the mirror of Skypiea as well. Both arcs feature a completely isolated location, the crew traveling 10,000 meters up or down to get there. Both focus on long-standing civil discontent spanning centuries, and funnily enough, both arcs even feature the main antagonist using an arc in an attempt to destroy their respective islands. Luffy even fights on both the Noah and the Arc Maxim. The Arc Maxim, by the way, is something that NL could only build due to discovering the revolutionary technology of wood. Because before Jaya got flung up, the Skypieans built everything out of clouds. As a side note, I've always loved the idea that the Sky people all worship the ground, in the same way that many cultures on the ground worship the sky. But bringing back that East Blue element, Fishman Island ends in the exact same way as the East Blue saga, with both of them essentially being prologues of their respective eras. East Blue ends with the crew beginning their adventure and setting sail into the Grand Line, and Fishman Island ends with the crew beginning their adventure again and setting sail into the New World. And the first thing the crew encounter on both occasions is a whale, or indeed whales plural, in the New World. I think the collective noun is a pod. Doesn't matter though, the overall point is that the story can now begin. Which takes us to the similarities between Dressrosa and Alabasta, and those sagas probably go without saying. But I'm gonna say some of them anyway, but not the ones you're thinking of. Everyone with the capacity to read can pick up on the parallels of warlords, kingdoms, rogue marines, fire brothers, and princesses in distress that we pick up on the side of the road. But what fascinates me most about these particular sagas are the small things, the almost absurdly minute details. One of my favorites is that Usopp's Tabasco attack on Sugar is a direct callback to when he fought Mr. Five on Little Garden. There he fired a spicy treat which Mr. Five ate, thinking that it was a bomb, and he thought wrong. That's the entire genesis of the Sugar plan. It works that one time, so you know what, let's do it again. Except this time, we invert it, and Usopp ends up being the one to eat the attack. Speaking of Mr. Five though, a lot of Alabasta era devil fruits are given direct lazy sequels, with Gladius's Palmu Palmanomi acting as the inverse Bomu Bomu. One only affects the user, and one only affects objects. And then of course there's Miss Valentine's Kilo Kilo fruit, which receives a ton variant. You know, nobody ever talks about Mark Weiss, and there's good reason for that. But I do want to point out this image that Oda drew of him as a child, because it shows that he's been wearing that same hat for pretty much his entire life. So underneath that thick forest of chest hair, and deep within the copious body fat, there's probably a really touching and emotional story about where this hat came from and what it means to Mark Weiss. But the most important inversion is that Dressrosa is what Alabasta would have become if Crocodile succeeded. We get to see a very direct what if, and I think this is a very powerful way of writing a series as long as One Piece, to explore the same ideas but from a flipped perspective. But who was the better antagonist, Crocodile or Doflamingo? Well, you can vote for yourselves by shopping at storeglr.com, now featuring both Doflamingo and the newly released Crocoboy. These shirts are designed in-house, made from premium tri-blend fabric, shipped worldwide, and directly support the channel, primarily so that I can continue supporting your crippling addiction to fictional pirate content. Also, if you take a photo of yourself and at me on Twitter, then you could end up in a Grand Line review video just like these fine Grand Fleet members, and don't their chest coverings look glorious? So do that thing, but for now, more pirate talk. The most obvious next mirror is Water 7 and the 4 Emperor sagas, which feature a core crew member being blackmailed to leave and setting the crew up against impossible odds. Once in Paradise, ruled by the world government, and once in the New World, ruled by the emperors. Sanji even has his own I want to live moment, except instead of loudly declaring it to the world, it's much more of an intimate sob to Luffy alone. But these are the sagas of both respective eras that tackle the idea of crew breakdown. And speaking of crew breakdown, who remembers when Robin broke down Frankie's balls? Because I very recently found found out exactly why that happened. Apparently, the Japanese audience was very amused by one of Robin's attacks called Cinco Fleur, but Cinco sounds like Chinko, the Japanese word for penis, which Oda thought was absolutely hilarious, and thus he sacrificed Frankie's nuts and bolts for the sake of acknowledging the gag. The interesting thing about Whole Cake Island, just moving on from the ball talk, the interesting thing about Whole Cake Island in particular is that it has a literal mirror world, one where Luffy fights a mirror image of himself in Katakuri. And while many people who subscribe to the mirror idea tend to compare Katakuri to Rob Lucci, the real Enisobi similarities come to us in the form of Wano. The raid on Onigashima is the new world attack on Enisobi. The Straw Hats marching into an isolated island stronghold, both of which float actually. Just realized that. And we also shouldn't forget that the end of Water 7 saw the first reveal of the 4 emperors. We had Shanks, Whitebeard, Monstrously Inaccurate Silhouette 1, and Monstrously Inaccurate Silhouette 2. So something Oda revealed a couple of years after this is that more often than not, he structures his story according to the kinds of silhouettes he wants to draw. Just listen to this. What I want to do most in One Piece is character models, not story. When I have created a character silhouette that no one's ever seen before, I feel the happiest. Once I've created it, I want to use it soon. I create episodes for just that reason, so the story gets longer. Essentially, he wants to keep making fun silhouettes, which means that he has to create entire characters and story arcs for those silhouettes. And that's why One Piece is 25 years long. But while the end of Water 7 introduced us to the 4 emperors, the end of Wano saw the exit of those emperors, as well as the introduction of our new set, including Luffy. Again, the inverse. Luffy learns about emperors in Water 7, and then Luffy is an emperor by the end of the 4 Emperor saga. I should also address that in the quest for the perfect mirror, it's also very common to try and isolate Wano as a Thriller Bark parallel, and it does have some stuff admittedly, like say Ryuma in common, but in my opinion, Thriller Bark is much more similar to our current arc Egghead Island. In fact, Egghead Island is another one of those fusion mirrors combining both Sabadi and Thriller Bark. Firstly, through the very rare concept of the genre switch. One Piece changes locations and atmospheres quite radically, but the story itself almost never changes genre. It's very consistent action-adventure shonen, with the 2 exceptions of Thriller Bark and Egghead Island. Thriller Bark goes full zombie horror, and Egghead Island is now going full sci-fi horror mystery. Although I have to call out the anime now because, look, you won't believe this, but there is a consistency error in Thriller Bark, whereby the anime identifies 2 zombie 36s. And I sure hope somebody got fired for that blunder, but that's not even the worst one. For whatever reason in the anime, Zombie 28 is renumbered to Zombie 29. So the anime completely erased the existence of Zombie 29. To be fair, the Straw Hats went on to erase the existence of all zombies. But still, I demand justice for Zombie 29. But the primary connective tissue between Thriller Bark and Egghead Island, and Sabadi actually, is Bartholomew Kuma. Thriller Bark saw his first active role in the series, as well as the Cyborgian revelation, which Egghead Island is now bringing full circle. You even have the return of Kuma's big ball of pain, damage for Zoro, and memories for Bonnie. Both painful, lots and lots of pain. But Kuma is one of the many cast of Sabadi returning for its sequel, Egghead, along with Kizaru, Sentomaru, and many, oh so many Pacifista. And obviously we don't know how this ends yet, but Egghead Island is pivotal, because Sabadi ended with a skill check for the Straw Hats, a skill check which they failed. They failed. And we have a similar skill check approaching now. The Straw Hats are faced with the Seraphim, which are pushing them in the same way that the Pacifista used to pre-time skip, and we have our familiar light-based admiral who the crew were utterly powerless against. So if we continue to invert things, then we could very well see the defeat of Kizaru. But either way, this is the beginning of the end, as we have one final mirror. Whatever happens next after Egghead Island is going to be rapidly building up our next Marineford. And if we were to follow the pattern of flipping things, then instead of Luffy joining a war to save his brother who goes on to die, then I could imagine that we have a brother who doesn't die joining a war to go on to save Luffy. And you know, Luffy being captured or imprisoned, it's a bit of a One Piece staple. I honestly can't even remember how many times it's happened. I even had a whole video where I counted how many times he was captured or imprisoned, and I'm pretty sure it's well over 18 at this point, which means that Luffy's imprisonments are of legal voting age, which could also trigger Luffy's Vivia card as it did Ace's, and finally summon the Grand Fleet to do the big thing it is that they're meant to do. Now, just a note on fictional pirate war, there is a common misconception within this fanbase. Because Oda did once say that he was going to draw the biggest war in manga history, but for whatever reason, a lot of people thought that that was referring to Wano, despite the fact that Oda said this. Right now, we're in a really exciting story in the land of Wano, but if Luffy manages to survive and sail away, then I'll be drawing the biggest battle in One Piece history. A thrilling and wild detailed story, the likes of which no one's ever read before. So firstly, I love that Oda says if Luffy survives, as if he's a living, breathing person and Oda is just the guy chronicling his life. But he also very clearly says that the big war is after Wano, which I only bring up because it's very common for people to criticize Wano for not living up to Marineford, which isn't fair because it was never supposed to. That's what our final saga is supposed to do. But even that isn't the end of One Piece, because the very last pre-time skip arc is the post-war arc. A very somber epilogue to pre-time skip events, lots of licking wounds and coming to terms with our own personal weaknesses. But post-time skip, this is set up to be a reflection of success, a state of dreams being achieved and the world ideally being changed for the better. But we can even go a step further than this by asking, what is the final panel of One Piece going to be? Well, the final shot of pre-time skip is this iconic shot of the Straw Hat sitting on a rock. Rock, by the way, happens to be the character who spent the fourth most time wearing the Straw Hat after Roger, Shanks, and Luffy respectively. But I just have this image of the final panel of One Piece being the Straw Hat, whether it's placed onto the head of a child in the next generation, or whether it's placed next to the grave of Shanks, as Luffy finally returns it after becoming a great pirate. Whatever the case, I do think that our final panel is going to be eerily similar as our long journey finally comes to a full stop. I am going to flip a coin. If it lands on heads, then you become the Pirate King. Wealth, fame, power, other things, it's all yours. Whereas if it lands on other heads, the frownier heads, then you die, a horrible donut-related death. No time for second thoughts, let's go. So today on Man in a Room, who talks about fictional pirates, we are going to get into a very core feature of this series that is shockingly overlooked, and it is smiley faces. Given that the entirety of this story centers around the concept of a joy boy, it should be no surprise that Eiichiro Oda has incorporated the motif of smiles ever since the very first page of the series. As when Roger was confronted with the face of tragedy, he simply responded with the face of lol. One Piece has always been about subversive duality, which is just a really fancy way of saying two things, each doing the thing that the other one should be doing. The Will of D is a prime example of this. Each mighty D wielder has the exact same response when confronted with death. It's not fear, it's not sadness, in fact, it's not any of the bad things that we typically associate with this experience. Instead, it's a delightsome smile. Eiichiro Oda's use of subversive smiles in One Piece is almost to the point of pervasive, such as the smile devil fruits cursing their unknowing consumers with one of the most horrifying conditions I have ever witnessed in all of media. But then you add in another layer that this forced happiness was made by a substance called sad, which itself was made by a smiling clown. And clowns, they're meant to bring happiness. Instead, this clown made sad, and the sad made happy, but the happy was still sad. Those are the kind of layers that we're dealing with here. And here's where we get to the point. The part where in the comments people say video starts at this time, because you may think that Luffy is the ultimate representation of this smile idea. However, he is only one side of the coin, with the other being his brother Ace, both of whom are represented by the comedy and tragedy smiley faces on Ace's trademark hat. Ace could have, and even arguably should have been, the Pirate King, because he was quite literally born for that purpose. But Ace also had the inherited will to be Joy Boy, and could have even been the sun god Nika himself, what with all of the literal suns it is that he managed to craft. Ace's fate was decided in one moment by a simple coin flip. One decision that could have changed the entire course of this world. It's no coincidence that the very final shot of Banaro Island is Ace's hat, with the tragedy and comedy smiles flipped. This is how the coin landed for Ace. The happy is now sad, and the sad is now happy. It's also no coincidence that Ace lost his hat after this. I don't know where it could have gone. Doesn't matter though, he doesn't need it because by that point his fate was sealed and the coin was no longer needed. At this point, everything was settled. Luffy was going to become the Pirate King and Ace was going to die a horrible donut-related death, but it very easily could have been the other way around. So let's talk about why Ace ever existed to begin with. Ace's biology was concocted as a result of Roger realizing that he would not live to fulfill the ultimate will of Joy Boy. Roger understood exactly when and where this fate would be fulfilled, and he decided, hey, I'ma make a special present just for this occasion. And furthermore, when quizzed on who would become the next Pirate King, Roger said, and I quote, "The next Pirate King is going to be the Will of D. The Will of D's nuts, cause it's my son, ha ha ha." But that is a lot of expectations to put on a child without knowing a single thing about them, primarily because, you know, they don't exist yet. And as a result, Ace grew up in a perpetual state of existential crisis. And one of the exchanges that left the most impact on me was when Ace asked Garp whether or not he should have been born. And Garp simply answered, "You'll have to live live to find out. And that worked out well, didn't it? In the end, the answer was maybe and possibly that he was only born with the sole purpose to die. Very Jesus-like, really, which is only made more allegorical by the fact that Ace carries a literal cross on his back with Whitebeard's tattoo. But Ace is that fancy term, the subversive duality at work. He was born for one purpose, and everyone has expectations that he is the one who is going to do the thing. The world government wanted to kill him, anticipating a future pirate king. His late father was certain that he would be the next king, and Yamato had no doubt that Ace was going to bring about the dawn of the world. The entire world was just sitting patiently, waiting for Ace to rock it. The only ones who didn't were, interestingly enough, the ex-members of the Roger Pirates, Shanks and Rayleigh specifically, presumably because both of them knew about Luffy's words and decided to bet on him in this 50-50. But for everyone else, Ace was the second coming of Pirate God. In fact, he was the second in a lot of things. The second Roger, the second expected Pirate King, and even the second division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, which really does cement the fact that despite initially being named Goldie, everything about Ace was much more of a silver medal. But as a result, it's not hard to see why Ace was less than keen in following in his father's footsteps. To be clear, Ace doesn't necessarily hate Roger, because he did get very defensive whenever anyone insulted his father. Actually, defensive is the wrong word. What's the right one? Attackive. There we go. Attackive. Ace got very attackive and viciously beat the crap out of people. But when you've been raised in the shadow of the most infamous criminal to have ever lived, resentment is probably quite a natural feeling. In fact, even considering who he was raised by, which basically boils down to Garp and Whitebeard and what we're going to call the 2.5 men model, both of those men held the utmost respect for Roger, but both of them were also fierce rivals and enemies of Roger. And that mixture really does sum up Ace quite nicely. Huge degree of respect for his father, but also a huge degree of animosity. And on top of that, Ace's brother wanted to become the Pirate King himself, and so Roger's legacy became completely inescapable for Ace. That does bring up one key point though. Luffy wanted to become the Pirate King, which means that Ace never would have pursued that path. True enough, but let's just say that if one tiny event went just a little bit differently, then Luffy's dreams would be much less of an issue. Just like the smiles on his hat, Ace's destiny could have gone either way. He could have become the Joy Boy or the Tragedy Boy. Luffy may have the literal Nika Devil Fruit, but Ace inherited his own sun god-esque qualities. Ace's first Spade Pirates crew member, Master Juice, was both present for Ace's consumption of the Merimeri no Mi, but also later went on to state that he and the rest of the pirates saw Ace like the sun, this beacon of warmth and power to gather around. In addition to this, Ace was able to win the approval of Jinbei, captain of the Sun Pirates, and as mentioned before, this gets quite literal when Ace is capable of creating miniature suns to use in fruit-based fight battling. Seriously, if we knew about all of this stuff, the Joy Boys, the Sun Gods pre-time skip, then the leading theory would be that he was Ace and not Luffy. Also, here's a fun thing. Have you ever realized that Ace had more brothers than just Luffy and Sabo? During his travels, Ace met both Shanks and Buggy, two children who Roger did actually raise aboard the Oro Jackson since they were teeny tiny babbies. So in a way, they're kind of like spiritual brothers, having been raised by Ace's father. In fact, one of the relationships I enjoy most in One Piece was that very short-lived Ace-Buggy dynamic, because Buggy quite liked Ace. He even mentioned that, unlike Luffy, Ace is a pretty cool dude. To be fair though, Ace didn't kick him in the balls, so that probably helped Buggy's impression of him. But then Ace and Buggy threw a party together and became drinking buddies. Ace even offered to give Buggy information on where Luffy currently was. It was such a strange dynamic, but then again so was meeting Shanks. Which was bizarre because firstly, Shanks somehow had two arms in the anime, but after some initial hostilities, they ended up throwing a party just like Buggy did. Shanks and Buggy, by the way, also two sides of the same coin, both with the same beginnings and ending up in the same place as emperors via radically different paths. And I think it's easy enough to figure out who represents comedy and who represents tragedy, which, it does not bode well for Shanks in the future. But brothers are a recurring motif in Ace's life. In addition to Luffy, Sabo, Shanks, and Buggy, Ace also had 1,617 other brothers courtesy of the Whitebeard Pirates, one of which was Izo, which in retrospect must have led to a very awkward exchange when Ace said, "Hey, brother Izo, you know that the citizens of your homeland are being tortured on a daily basis by an alcoholic dragon, a BDSM bird, whatever the crap queen is, and a fish on a lawnmower?" To which Izo just replied, "Yeah, but I'm sure things will just work themselves out." And they did, because Wano is now free and Izo is now dead. But look, let's get down to the important moment here. I often make fun of Ace on this channel, which doesn't come from a place of hate. It's more about finding the comedy within the tragedy. I think that Ace is a heavily flawed character who made a series of unbelievably stupid decisions that ultimately led to his downfall. All fairly easily preventable, mind you. But that's also why I really like him. He feels real. Like just some guy who made mistakes and paid the price for it. And pun incoming, but you could say that Ace royally screwed up here and paved paved the way for Luffy to become the Pirate King. Despite how hard he strived not to become his father, Ace inherited one very key aspect of Roger, which, embarrassingly enough, was his prematureness. Roger arrived too early at Laugh Tale, and Ace arrived too early to fight Blackbeard. And very much in keeping with Ace's theme of twos, he arrived roughly 2 years too early, whereas Luffy was patient. Sorry, no, what I mean to say is that Rayleigh forced Luffy to be patient. But even so, a coin flip is an act of chance. It's not something that Ace had any control of in the grand scheme of things, because his fate was not sealed by deciding to pursue Blackbeard. Sadly enough, what really cemented Ace's death was an event that occurred in a time and a place that he was neither there for, nor did he have any say in how it occurred. That place is Jaya, an island rather appropriately and forebodingly shaped like a skull, and it was on this island that someone was going to be chosen to die. And that choice was going to be made by Luffy and Blackbeard. Because that's the thing about being one side of a coin. There's a whole different side out there whose actions are going to directly affect you. The threesome of Ace, Luffy, and Blackbeard are one of One Piece's most iconic menage a characters. Any action taken by one directly affects the other two, or I should say affected, past tense. Because our coin flip happened on Jaya. This was the moment that decided who would die, Luffy or Ace. Because originally Blackbeard had intended to capture Luffy and use his infamy to become a warlord of the sea and then initiate all of his dickbaggery. Very potentially killing him, because that's the thing about bounties that are stipulated dead or alive. The reason why Blackbeard left Ace alive was to conjure that war with Whitebeard. With Luffy, there's no such reason. He's a nobody. Or at least back then he was a nobody. And in the event that Luffy were to die, well, that's when the Will of D acts up. Just like Ace's death was Luffy's wake-up call, Luffy's death would have been Ace's. He would accept his heritage and inherit his brother's dream to become the Pirate King, thus making Luffy the tragedy to Ace's comedy. But instead, what we got was the other way around. The incident with Blackbeard ended with Luffy escaping, which directly led to capturing Ace instead. And shortly thereafter, Ace would die on the battlefield right before Luffy's eyes, making Ace the tragedy to Luffy's comedy. Also, Ace died with a smile on his face, subverting the whole thing as Oda tends to do. But is there a world where both survived? I mean, on odd occasions, coins can land on their sides. I'm going to say probably not though. One big issue is that Ace's pursuit of Blackbeard was never going to be halted due to the fact that Blackbeard himself was pursuing Luffy. So when Ace discovered that, he felt he had no choice but to stop Teach right then and there. So weirdly enough, Luffy's freedom locks in Ace's future, or lack of future, unfuture. And then there's an even worse case scenario. Because even if the coin lands on its side, that doesn't mean doubly good things, it could mean doubly bad things. There is a world where Blackbeard becomes the Pirate King because both events come true. He captures Luffy and Ace goes after him prematurely regardless, thus killing both brothers and leaving all of us at the mercy of a very unhygienic cherry pie overlord. And when put into, well, that perspective, the coin flip doesn't feel as bad as it could have been. But that's what Ace's life came down to. He was a man bred to be king. He had all of the genetic power, all of the fruit-based power, all of the wonderful mentoring, all of the inherited will, and even the backing of fate to do just the thing it is that he was born to do. By all rights, he should be the next Pirate King. But what can you do? Well, I know what we can do, because we are going to decide your fate. I am going to flip a coin. If it lands on heads, then you become the Pirate King. Wealth, fame, power, other things, it's all yours. Whereas if it lands on other heads, the frownier heads, then you die a horrible donut-related death. No time for second thoughts, let's go. Oh no. Well, good luck. And make sure to watch this next video because, well, look, no special reason, but just do it quickly. This is the moment that changed One Piece forever. The arbitrary decision of the 3 worst generation captains leaving Wano. Faced with 3 paths forward, one leading to Shanks, one leading to Blackbeard, and one leading to Dr. Vegapunk. These 3 captains could have gone in any direction and the series could have gone radically differently. Law could have met Vegapunk, Kid could have fought Blackbeard, and the most insane outcome of all, Luffy could have finally reunited with Shanks. For some, things would have turned out a lot better. For others, things would have gone significantly worse. And again, all of this was based on the completely arbitrary fate take the wheel decision. And the only thing we need to completely shake up how One Piece ends is for Trafalgar Law to also want to take the middle path. So here's how that plays out. In this scenario, all 3 captains greedily and pettily want to take the middle path. So they all draw straws and leave fate to chance. Or leave chance to fate, one or the other. And the winner of this round is Law, who decides to take the middle path. Kid is the runner-up and will go left. Meanwhile, Luffy loses again and is forced to go right. This takes him to Egghead Island, which means we don't need to worry about Luffy in this scenario. Everything there plays out as we know it. However, things change quite a bit for our other two captains. Trafalgar Law and his band of men, women, and bear end up setting sail to Elbaf and swiftly encountering Emperor of the Sea, red-haired Shanks. Sounds like a familiar outcome to encountering Blackbeard, but it's really not. Primarily because Law is smart enough not to launch into an all-out catastrophic attack on an emperor. That's really more of a Luffy or Eustace Kid kind of thing to do. And really, they could just sail right by, but Trafalgar Law has business on Elbaf. This island houses lots of potential secrets that need knowing. So I'm sure that Law would be very diplomatic and Shanks himself probably quite cordial because Law does have a public alliance with Luffy, so any friend of Rubber Lad is a friend of Shanks. Unless it's Bartolomeo because he's been a very, very naughty chicken man. There is one big problem though, which is that Shanks is now very serious about finding the whole One Piece thing. And since Law has recovered from his injury, Shanks is going to deliver an ultimatum. Hand over your mystery cube rubbings or fight the full might of the red hair pirates. And Law will think about this for like a second before immediately acquiescing. No matter how important the poneglyphs are, Law knows how outmatched he is here. He also probably knows that he could just wander over to the Straw Hats and go, hey, Nico Robin, could I see the cubes again? But it doesn't have to be a completely bitter experience either. Shanks isn't a bad dude, and I could see him allowing Law to make copies of the copies so that they can both share in the poneglyphic goodness. The only reason why he was so merciless with Kid is because Kid was going to kill all of Shanks's friends, you know, the fancy lady captain, geriatric captain, and most importantly, frog captain. And even if Shanks does just outright take the poneglyphs, this is still a much better outcome for Law. Shanks then sets sail and leaves Law to his business on Elbaf, where he may very well go on to discover its unknown secrets. Again, pretty good all in all, at least comparatively to what happened against Blackbeard. And speaking of, in this timeline, on his way to Winter Island, Eustace Kid is assaulted by Blackbeard. I'm gonna be honest here, neither of the three paths that Kid could take are great options, but I think that this is potentially Kid's best outcome. Firstly, he's gonna grow a pair of boobs because Doc Q will turn each and every Kid pirate into a woman via his woman disease power. But beyond breasts, Blackbeard is actually the perfect opponent for Kid. Blackbeard is the anti-Shanks. When it comes to combat, Blackbeard has a demonstrable lack of planning, unfortunately combined with a critical mass of arrogance, which means that Blackbeard is not going to be able to avoid Kid's damned punk attack. This was the attack that was going to destroy an entire fleet of ships were it not for Shanks' wild observation haki. Blackbeard has currently displayed no such future sight, and his ship is going to be obliterated by the attack. Eustace Kid will not be stopped, which may have a very unfortunate side effect of killing Charlotte Pudding because she is on board the ship. However, the core crew would probably be saved by Van Alga, who teleports them all to Winter Island. And from here, Eustace Kid has a choice. He can either leave the Blackbeard pirates there, keep sailing and just wave, or he can make the wrong choice, and that's what he's gonna do. When Kid encountered the full might of the red hair pirates, he saw that as an opportunity. So now to see an emperor and a handful of crew members marooned on an island, well, that will practically be seen as a freebie. Eustace Kid will absolutely choose to engage, and Eustace Kid will absolutely be defeated again. With his awakening, Kid actually had a decent advantage at sea, but on land is a very different story, and there is no way that his crew can overcome even half of Blackbeard's primary crew. The darkness, the earthquakes, the teleporting, the boobs, Kid is going to be subject to all of them. The Kid pirates will either be killed or kept to be sold as slaves, and as for Kid himself, he may very well be killed in order to harvest his magical fruit powers. I mean, there is a potential world where Blackbeard offers Kid the chance to join his crew like he did with Kuzan and Gecko Moria, but even if he does, given how defiant Kid was against Kaido, he's not taking that offer up, which means that yes, he's almost certainly going to be killed for his magical fruit powers. So the major differences in this timeline are, Shanks and Blackbeard have swapped poneglyphs. Shanks now has the ones from Zo and Wano, whilst Blackbeard has the ones from Wano and Whole Cake Island, which is actually pretty bad for Blackbeard. Having recently invaded Whole Cake Island, he almost certainly has that poneglyph already, so now he has doubles. Doubles and no one to trade with. The Kid pirates are eliminated, Eustace Kid himself is eliminated from life, and Charlotte Pudding may also be a casualty. On the bright side though, the Heart pirates are still fully functional and ready to do whatever it is that they plan on doing. I don't know what their plans were. All right, let's rewind. In this scenario, all three captains greedily and pettily want to take the middle path, so they all draw straws and leave fate to chance, or leave chance to fate, one or the other. The winner of this round is Kid, who decides to take the middle path. Luffy is the runner-up and will go left. Meanwhile, Law loses the straw game and is forced to go right. This scenario takes Kid to Elbaf, so we don't need to deal with him. Shanks has already done that. But Law taking the right path means that he ends up at Egghead Island and encounters Jewelry Bonnie in the warm eddy. Law is able to save her with his OP powers, and then they encounter a very hostile Lilith. Shaka does the thing where he stops Lilith from killing the Heart Pirates, and then he invites them onto the island. If we're being honest here, Law probably doesn't want to get involved in any of this, but it's out of his hands. From his perspective, it's either land on the strange island or get eaten by the even stranger metal creatures. And just as with the Straw Hat, Stella is going to see this as a fated event. And he will of course ask for passage away from Egghead Island on the Heart Pirates vessel. And you know what? They might even make it as well. A fleet of 100 marine ships arriving is big and scary and great and all, but a single submarine is a pretty hard counter to those mere floaty boys. The big question is, will they actually get the chance to escape? Because shortly after this, York will enact Murder.exe, and without the raw firepower of the Straw Hats, I don't think that any of the Vegapunks or the Heart Pirates stand a chance against the Seraphim. It's particularly bad because Zoro was the only one who knew about the Lunarian weakness, and he's not here, he's elsewhere. And as overpowered as he is, there's really only so much that Law can do on his own against York, 4 Seraphim, a Marine Admiral, and a fleet twice the size of the Paramount War deployment. The best possible way this ends is for Law to be captured by the Marines. However, I think it's more likely that he would be eventually overcome and killed by the Seraphim first, which means that all of the Vegapunks bar Stella and York are going to die. And let's be real, things probably won't go great for Stella from here. And I would say that this is the worst possible outcome for Law. Meanwhile, blissfully unaware of all of the kill murdering, Luffy and the Straw Hats are attacked by Blackbeard on the way to Winter Island. And this resolution might seem a bit underwhelming, but there's an obvious solution to this problem. Frankie activates a coup de burst, and the crew avoids the conflict entirely, because there is nothing in this world that seems to be capable of matching the Thousand Sunny's abilities. Luffy isn't going to take this fight, because even if he wants to, a more responsible crew member will just say, think about how much it took to beat Kaido. Right now it's just the 10 of us, a cloud in a baton, and a swamp in a barrel. Think about it, Luffy, we should not do this. So they'll just go fly away, and we would end up with another Jaya situation. Is what I would say, if not for one person. Charlotte Pudding is aboard Blackbeard's ship. Pudding's engagement to Sanji is a highly public affair, and so all Blackbeard needs to do is yell, I have your chef's pudding woman, and I'm gonna do some real bad things to her. And in this case, the Straw Hats 100% fight. I mean, Sanji even refused to abandon his abusive family on Whole Cake Island, so he's not gonna leave Pudding here like this. Which means that we'd probably get to see the gender swap Straw Hats, which we've already seen in an SBS, but just like Trafalgar, it would be cool to see them in the actual series. Potentially, we'd even get to see a gender swapped Caribou, which I think would be far too hot for any shonen magazine to publish. Ultimately, though, I can't help but feel like the Blackbeard pirates are at a huge disadvantage. The full Straw Hat crew versus Blackbeard, Jesus Burgess, Doc Q, and Van Elga. And Stronger, I suppose Stronger as well. But even with a sickly Pegasus, the math still just doesn't work out. Blackbeard is a man guided by fate, very much in the same way that Luffy is. And I think that fate spared Blackbeard this day, although I suppose you could also say the same for Luffy. The problem is that Blackbeard has a mystery factor. There is something we don't know about him, something very important that could very well ensure his victory in this situation. But that goes a bit too far into pure speculation for my liking. So with everything we do actually know, I think the Straw Hats win here. Or it's a scenario where they rescue Pudding and then immediately run away. Either way, it's not good for Blackbeard, and so the major differences in this timeline are Law and the Heart Pirates are almost certainly dead, almost all of the Vegapunks are dead, Blackbeard suffers a defeat and gets no poneglyph rubbings, as well as having his only key to reading them being taken, but also the Straw Hats don't meet Vegapunk, and that will probably have very negative ramifications down the line. Alright, let's rewind. The winner of this round is Luffy, who decides to take the middle path. Law is the runner-up and will go left. Meanwhile, Kid loses the straw game and is forced to go right. Here we deal with Law very easily. Everything plays out as we know against Blackbeard. But meanwhile, Eustace Kid arrives at Egghead Island, encountering Jewelry Bonnie stuck in the warm eddy, to which he may, or honestly may not, rescue her. Kid is he's not a nice person, to put it lightly. He's a pirate known for excessive collateral damage, legitimate mass murder, and there was even that one time where he crucified alongside those poor dudes. So he may very well just not bother even trying to help Bonnie. And even if he does, there's no guarantee that he can actually save her. Kid doesn't have Law's god powers, and it took a very special Straw Hat skill set to rescue Bonnie. So I don't think things are looking great for her either way. The Kid pirates then encounter Lilith and the Sea Beasts, and just as with Luffy and Law, Shaka will attempt to stop Lilith, except this time it doesn't work. Mostly because Eustace Kid will have already launched an attack before Lilith can. And again, if the prospect of facing Shanks and literally all of the Red Hair forces is not going to deter Kid, then neither will a handful of giant metal fish. So from here, Lilith will ignore any pleas from Shaka and go on the all-out offensive against Kid. And this will have a side effect of making Lilith very, very happy because, you know, she gets to shoot things. And Kid is in a bit of an interesting spot because his Devil Fruit will have some degree of control over the metal weapons and creatures used against him, but ultimately what he's going up against is the full might of Egghead Island, a location so heavily fortified and weaponsome that the Marines have sent no less than 100 ship things to deal with it. And I don't think that Kid can win in this situation. Let's say that he neutralizes all of the sea beasts through magnets, that's fine. But what does he do about every other weapon on the island, many of which are not necessarily metallic in nature? As well as the Seraphim, how does he deal with the Seraphim? I dare say the Victoria Punk will once again become the Victoria Sunk, and Kid will be defeated a third time, as well as likely die from drowning. To clarify, it's not that I want to do this to Kid, it's just that with the way that Oda has written him, there are very, very few options. In fact, there's one option, there's always one. Because Kid's automatic response to anything is to just attack it. And in this case, all three of the things that he's going to attack have the power to overcome him. And with no hope of rescue whatsoever, York will then succeed in murdering the Vegapunks. Meanwhile, again blissfully unaware of all of the kill murdering, the Straw Hats pull up at the long-awaited Elbaf to discover the Red Hair Pirates. And this is my favorite outcome by far. Because at this point, Luffy has become a great pirate, or at the very least a pirate equal to that of Shanks. So one of two things can happen here. The first is that Luffy doesn't believe he's become a great pirate yet, and so he refuses to meet Shanks in order to keep his promise. He might sail right by or even dock at a different part of Elbaf. I can't see him passing up the opportunity to explore Elbaf. But this meeting, it's not happening. Alternatively, Luffy does believe he's become a great pirate, and so it's time to return the Straw Hat. And I think that we'll look back on this as a missed opportunity in the history of the One Piece world, because I personally don't think that Luffy will ever get the opportunity to return the Straw Hat. But whatever business Shanks has elsewhere, we're putting it on hold for this reunion. Usopp meets up with Yasop, as well as Dory, Broggy, Oimo, and Kashi. In fact, this is actually a massive Usopp-focused situation, and I think what we see happen next is the greatest party in series history to date. But again, there is one problem. Again, Shanks, that dude, that guy, he is serious about finding the One Piece, and he's going to want Luffy's road poneglyphs. But they're not going to get into a fight battle for them. Instead, they'll settle things in the traditional pirate way, a Davy back fight. And whatever the outcome of this match, Shanks will leave once again clad in straw headwear, with Monkey D. Luffy setting sail, now completely head nude, but having kept his promise and now determined to complete his dream. Jewelry Bonnie is a child. Potentially. Is it out of the question? No. Would it be a great twist? Yeah. Have we recently been given evidence from a certain Saturnman implying that this could indeed be the case? Also, yes, but that's not all. Because Jewelry Bonnie not being quite what she seems is far from a new idea. And it's because Bonnie has one of the most interesting devil fruits in the entire series, featuring the ability to manipulate the ages of people, objects, and even herself, which I guess is redundant because she is, as far as we are aware, a people. But we've already seen many Bonnies from all over the age spectrum, from child to geriatric, and everything in between, and also everything that doesn't quite fit in between. To make things a bit more confusing, it's also implied that her fruit can access alternate reality futures with the distorted future technique, which Bonnie used to make herself become all bulky, very much like her father's physique. But she also used it on Luffy to turn him into his bad timeline future self. So the thing about Bonnie is that Oda has never stated her actual age. In fact, he has gone to great lengths to do exactly not that. In the SBS of Volume 68, Oda was asked what the worst generation ages and heights were, and he diligently gave exact numbers for everyone except Bonnie. He specifically stated that Bonnie's age was a quote estimation. And that estimation is that pre-time skip, she looked around 22 years old. So post-time skip, we're looking at a potential 24-year-old Bonnie. Although actually, even that's difficult. She's definitely 2 years older, but 2 years older from what age? Because for all we know, she's perpetually maintaining that 22-year-old visage. And this led to a huge wave of theories that Bonnie was actually much, much older than we think. The major thought was that Bonnie may even even be an ancestor of Big Mom, or that Bonnie was from even further back and lived during a certain void century, all of which has now been debunked because we know that she's the daughter of Kuma. But the other possibility is still well and truly alive. The idea that, what if Bonnie is actually just a child pretending to be an adult? Because it would explain a lot, not just Saturn's comments, but a whole host of Bonnie-based behaviors from the Egghead Island arc and her entire time in the series. Also, this video is sponsored by Holzkern, the market leader for watches, jewelry, and accessories made from carefully selected and unique natural materials. For example, this beautiful bad boy right here. This watch is the Glorious Sydney from the Skyline collection, crafted from beautiful Padokan marble. I got it because I live in Sydney, so it would obviously be the best one, and it is, but there's a ton of other great options available. Holzkern also produce incredible rings, bandlets, and their entire range make for phenomenal gifts. It's very hard to explain in words, but everything also comes in these like super chunky, satisfying boxes. So the whole gift giving and or receiving experience is that much more enhanced. Plus there's free shipping worldwide and 2 to 5 day delivery within the US and most of the EU. And if you use my code on screen, where am I going to put it? Let's say here. Use this and you'll get a colossal 15% off. So click my link in the description to attain your marvelous Naturesome bling with a 24-month warranty, 24-day right of return, and I feel like there should be a third thing to do with 24. Let's say 24 units of human satisfaction because you now have a nice thing. But also, they're genuinely good products that I do wear on a daily basis. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. Recently in chapter 1089, Saint Saturn made a curious comment regarding good old JB, because when alerted to her presence on Egghead Island, he rather uncharacteristically said, "Leave her there. She's just a girl," and then presumably proceeded to guzzle more and more of those delicious celestial sausages. Priorities, I guess. Confusing priorities, especially considering the following. Jewelry Bonnie is a globally wanted criminal with a fairly chunksome bounty placed on her head, consisting of 320 million berries, which is more than Luffy was worth after he invaded and consequently destroyed any slobby. She doesn't seem like someone who we can just let go, unless she's not actually a threat. Like say that their bounty was more of a thing issued as a threat directly to Kuma. And now that he's irrelevant, Bonnie no longer poses a threat to the world government, potentially because she's just a child. I should say that there is a difference between fan and official translations. In the fan translation, they really lit this fire by having Saturn refer to Bonnie as a quote, little girl. However, in the official, Saturn says just a girl. Although, unless Saint Saturn is being a little bit misogynistic, functionally, there's no difference. In either translation, he's downplaying her, much like an adult would downplay a child. And one response I've commonly seen pop up is that because Saint Saturn has reached the final form of the geriatric skill tree, pretty much everyone would be considered a child compared to him, especially if there's some sort of immortality shenaniganry going on. And look, that's fair. But also, what makes Bonnie different from anyone else on the island? Like, say Nami. She's even younger than Jewelry Bonnie theoretically, only 20 units of age, and her bounty is barely over Bonnie's at 366 million berries. But she should be fine, right? Because Nami is just a girl. No threat at all to the world government, but that's probably not quite how they see her. Honestly, just a girl is more how I would refer to someone like Moda. Someone fairly irrelevant and unthreatening in the grand scheme of the world. The worst thing Moda could possibly do is probably poison the milk that she sells to the world government. That would be rather fiendish. Whereas the worst thing Jewelry Bonnie can do is become a pirate infamous enough to become a member of the worst generation who are currently poised to overthrow every established power system on the planet. And wouldn't you know it, she's done just that. And it all just seems so sloppy. Especially considering how brutal Saint Saturn was legitimately one panel earlier when he gave the order to sink the researcher's ship just to be safe. So why don't we capture or kill Bonnie also just to be safe? We have no idea what she learned on Egghead Island, what kind of technology she might have accessed. She has a lightsaber. We can't let her have a lightsaber. Or what Kuma daddy memories she may have borne witness to, because that's big stuff. It just seems odd for Saint Saturn to be this lax, but only in regards to Bonnie. What is so special about Bonnie? Or I guess the opposite question, why is she so unremarkable that we can just ignore her and leave her alone? As stated before, one explanation is that Bonnie's status as a fearsome piratess was partially engineered by the world government itself to ensure Kuma's cooperation, or to give her a price high enough to be worth catching, considering that she escaped from the world government. And it's interesting to note that the only time we've seen Bonnie's bounty poster was in the non-canon One Piece Stampede, where she was listed as dead or alive. But if she was such a valuable hostage, then she might have been given the Sanji treatment of only alive in the actual world. And this idea is supported by the pre-time skip Sakazuki interaction where he says, "A cold shiver ran through through me when I heard you'd run away from the government. Previously, it was suspected that Bonnie herself was the danger. However, I think it makes a lot more sense that it's Kuma that Sakazuki is worried about. I mean, I say it makes more sense, but also by this point, Kuma should have been fully converted, so they shouldn't have needed Bonnie anymore. So why did they bother to send a whole admiral after Bonnie, if in Saturn's own words, she's just a girl? Well, we're going to answer that in a bit. But taking a step back now to the beginning of Egghead, there is evidence that may support the Bonnie child theory. When the Straw Hats discovered Bonnie caught in the warm eddy, she was in her child form, so she was engulfed in seawater and unable to use her devil fruit powers. So it's very possible that, in this situation, she reverted back to her original non-fruit tampered with body. The unfortunate counter to this is that how devil fruits interact with water has always been inconsistent in One Piece. For example, when Chopper falls into water, he remains in Brain Point. He doesn't revert to his full reindeer, aka original form. And also, Luffy can still stretch underwater so long as it's someone else stretching him, like his head at Arlong Park. But also, Luffy and Chopper are both Zoan users, which still sounds weird to say, but regardless, their transformations are a bit more permanent than the effects of your standard paramecia. However, in theory, the sea itself does not nullify devil fruit powers. What it does is cause paralysis in the user, although there's confusion about that due to the concept of sea stone, which seems to do the exact opposite, which is that it nullifies fruit powers, but it doesn't cause paralysis. And when Smoker speaks about sea stone, he says, "We still don't understand all the properties of sea stone, but we do know that it emits an energy identical to the oceans. Think of it as the sea in solid form," which we've since found out is not exactly accurate. TLDR, we can't rely on the warm eddy situation to provide an answer. It could have reverted Bonnie back to her original form, or she could have just been in child form for some reason when she was engulfed. But also, Bonnie's powers are a bit inconsistent even when we don't take seawater into consideration. Inconsistent, I'm just going to warn you now, it's a word I'm going to use a lot when it comes to Bonnie, every aspect of Bonnie. But specifically in regards to her powers, when she turned Vegapunk into a child, a lot of sparkling stars and stuff were separated from his body, which he referred to as his gems of experience, as if he was plugging a mobile game or something. But when Bonnie turns into a child, there are no such gems, perhaps indicating that she is lacking experience. Then again, this is another weird one, because when she turned Jinbei into a child, we didn't see any gems from him either, and he's very experienced at life in general. It's kind of a sinister idea, actually. What would happen if Bonnie tampered with or destroyed those gems? Could you Charlotte pudding this and actually erase the memories and experience of people, then they revert back to their older self without it? Questions for another time. But back to Bonnie, she genuinely behaves like a child as well. Throughout Egghead, Bonnie has exhibited classic childlike behavior. She immediately got along well with both Luffy and Chopper, one of whom is an actual child, and the other of which has the innocent mind of a child. So these three clicked instantly. There's also Bonnie's exaggerated fainting at the sight of insects, but also she is known to throw tantrums, is emotionally volatile, so much so that she even got mad at Vegapunk specifically for the bugs, not because of all the Kuma father stuff, but because of the bugs. Her attention is easily taken. And she has a love of pizza, which admittedly not great evidence, but what kid isn't obsessed with pizza? A celiac probably, but everyone else. And she eats like a child, even from the very beginning. Very messy. Although in the series there are other adults who eat like children, but their names are Luffy and Big Mom, basically children in adult bodies. Sort of like Bonnie, but less potentially literally. And on a more emotional note, one of the most heartfelt panels of the arc so far was when Bonnie said, "Please don't hurt my daddy," which is very childlike language, and it wasn't just a one-time slip either. Bonnie referred to Kuma as her daddy again as well. Of course, that's far from solid evidence, and a lot of pre-time skip Bonnie actually counters this idea. It's that word again, it's very inconsistent. Because many of the Worst Generation members have these inconsistencies between their pre- and post-time skip forms. The most evident one is Trafalgar Law, who is quite sadistic and scheming pre-time skip to the point where he's built as a potential antagonist. But then when Oda decided what he wanted to do with him, we had this 180 shift to general good guy hero man. And this is because, as I've often said, but I need to keep saying, the supernova were not created with a plan. They were all improvised. So a lot of them do change quite radically, and Jewelry Bonnie is no exception. Pre-time skip, she is incredibly smart, and more importantly, highly tactful, such as when she saves Zoro from causing trouble with St. Charles. But post-time skip, she's really lost that tactical edge. She acts less like a Nami and more like a Luffy. Although another Bonnie curiosity does exist, because we've actually seen an image of her as a child. where she is depicted as being quite poor, hardly the daughter of a king. Also, she does actually wear child-sized clothing, resulting in a very revealing adult form. However, that works either way. Either she is an actual child and those are her real clothes, I mean, I guess they're her real clothes either way, or it's a specific wardrobe choice to suit the devil fruit powers, so that she doesn't end up with super baggy clothes as a child or an old lady if needed. And honestly, it's one of the better excuses for fan service in all of anime and manga. And it also gave Oda room for a funny background gag, because if you look at Bonnie's crew, they all wear very tight and undersized clothing as well. One fact we do know about Bonnie is that she met Vegapunk before he lopped off his head, so before Punk Records existed in its current state. And that's a big deal because we do have a flashback with Kuma and Vegapunk where Stella has already separated his brain. However, this flashback looks like the recent past because Kuma looks very much like modern day Kuma. And I'm mostly confident in saying this because Kuma is 47 years old, and Oda loves his aesthetic age gaps. There's almost always a massive aesthetic difference between middle-aged men and those same men in their 20s and 30s. So this could be a handful of years ago, maybe a decade at most. And what we also know is that the Pacifista are quite recent in the grand scheme of things. When they made their debut on Sapody, no one knew what they were. So the Kuma project is likely quite recent. And then there's Blackbeard, always Blackbeard. He said something rather curious to our Jewelry Bonnie. I still can't believe such a young girl like you has a bounty of over 100 million on her head. Why not Blackbeard, huh? Why not? 22 is not that young. But then again, we would have to make the leap that Blackbeard knows her true age somehow, which is immediately thrown into question by his next line. If you be my woman, I'll take you along. And look, Blackbeard, he's a bad dude, but I don't think he's saying that if he knows that she's a child. I'm gonna give Blackbeard that particular benefit of the doubt. And to be completely honest, this is the biggest piece of evidence against the Bonnie child theory, because Oda has sexualized Bonnie in all of the typical ways with lots of legs, chest and butts, even one topless shot. But also, it was one line from Saturn that made me question this idea. When Luffy asked Bonnie if she's been to Egghead Island before, she replies, "When I was a kid." It was a normal lab back then. And I know that being a kid is subjective. If you ask a teenager, they'd probably say, yeah, I was a kid last year. Whereas if you ask a 70-year-old, then they're still probably considering themselves a kid when they were 20, maybe even their early 30s. But I suppose the fact that Bonnie doesn't refer to herself as a kid is either a fascinating psychological case of denial, or much more likely that she's more along the lines of the 22 to 24 years old as estimated. But let me know in the comments, how old do you think Jewelry Bonnie is? Edward, Weevil, Stussy, and Jewelry Bonnie. These three characters all have something in common, and that something is the common DNA they share with another set of three characters: Edward Newgate, Miss Buckingham Stussy, and Charlotte Linlin. Basically, they're all clones. And not just any clones, but clones of the Rocks Pirates. During the time of Mads, there was a secret project in the works to clone the most powerful pirate crew to have ever existed. This project failed, and was subsequently succeeded by the Warlord cloning project that resulted in the Seraphim. Why clone the Rocks Pirates though? This crew that came within a bee's man parts of taking over the entire world. But then again, more concerningly, where are the rest of the clones? Failed or no, is there a Kaido, a Shiki, or even a Rocksteady Beck himself, wandering around just waiting to reveal themselves as the hyper-advanced biological lurking legends? And perhaps even more terrifyingly, are we eventually going to see a modern-day Rocks Pirates reunion? I mean, I say eventually, it's kind of already happening as we speak. Subject number 1, Stussy, a clone of Miss Buckingham Stussy, better known to us as Miss Buckin, or I guess I should say assumed clone, because no one has outright stated that Miss Buckin is actually Miss Buckingham Stussy, but I think we're all clever enough to put this particular puzzle together. It's like the baby toy where you put the triangle in the triangle slot and the square in the square slot and so on and so forth. And in this case, Miss Buckin fits pretty damn well into the Buckingham slot. And you know what else fits perfectly into the Buckingham slot? Whitebeard, allegedly. We'll get to Evil in a bit though, because there's actually quite a few small connections that I initially missed in regards to Miss Buckin. Because what if I told you that Miss Buckin actually appeared on Wano? You'd probably say something like, duh, you're crazy, you clickbaiting internet charlatan. But it's true. In Orochi's flashback, we met an exceptionally intriguing hag named Higurashi, who initially caught our eye by using the Mane Mane no Mi to transform her face into that of Golden Lion Shiki. But what we also did was completely disregard the other face face that Higurashi showed us. The one where she turned into this beautiful, young, and at the time, assumedly miscellaneous woman. But this woman is Buckingham Stussy, and Higurashi was almost certainly a member of the Rocks Pirates, or at the very least she sailed with them, possessing connections to Kaido, Shiki, and now Stussy. Which I want to point out because it's just like, at the time, I completely disregarded that face. I thought it was Oda just, slapping a random woman on the real meat that is the Shiki, and I should have known better, because Shiki is never the meat. He's more of a side dish, like fries. I actually think he'd make great fries. But it's also worth noting that on the cover of chapter 1072, we see Caesar holding a sinister and rather fake-looking devil fruit, which may very well be Stussy's ability that's revealed at the end of the same chapter, given that the pattern on the fruit is the same pattern that we find on modern-day Miss Buchan's jacket. Granted, that is exceptionally flimsy evidence, but at the time, replicating Zoans, that was no problem. They did it with Kaido, so why not with Stussy as well? Which currently means that we could have succubuses or succubi floating around in the world. What's the collective noun for a group of succubi? I'm going to say it's a seduce of succubi. Heading very much in the opposite direction of seduction now, subject number 2 is Edward Weevil, who was designated as a number 2 due to his visual similarity with a number 2. Stussy came out of the clone oven immaculately, but Weevil was either left in for too long or not long enough. I'm not sure which. My bet is still that Weevil is one of the failed clones, perhaps constructed before they really hit that mark with Stussy. But all of a sudden, Weevil's entire story fits perfectly into the Whitebeard slot, because in chapter 802, Miss Buchan declared, "The only son with the blood of Whitebeard, the strongest pirate in the world, is you." And in retrospect, yeah, it is you being him. And of course it is. He is technically Whitebeard's biological family because he is Whitebeard. The only real difference, other than aesthetically and mentally, is that he lacks the Gura Gura no Mi, because at the time the green blood wasn't a thing, and paramecia powers were unable to be replicated. And as for why Buchan claims that he is the son of Whitebeard, well, initially I thought that it would be easier for the world to accept that than say he's a failed clone, but it could also be more sentimental than that. Miss Buchan could be trying to protect Weevil from the truth of his misshapen lab-based origins, and want him to live a more normal and socially acceptable life, going on to inherit all of Whitebeard's stuff, as may very well be his right. But also there may be some personal motivation for Miss Buchan. She is the self-proclaimed lover of Whitebeard, and she said another very interesting thing in chapter 802. After she announces that Weevil is Whitebeard's biological family, she then declares, "And that makes me the woman Whitebeard loved," which is it's a strange way of putting it. I don't know about you guys, but it really seems like Buchan feels a need to prove something and is using the technicality of taking on the role of Weevil's mother to do so, sort of like a maths equation. Weevil is the son of Father Whitebeard. I, Buchan, am the mother of the son. Therefore, I am the father's one and only true love person. I get the feeling that Whitebeard rejected her and that Buchan's never quite gotten over that, which is now escalated into this wild situation of raising his clone as her son. I also want to throw out there that it could be a more sappy answer as well. Like say Buchan is awkwardly playing the role of Whitebeard's lover again to protect Weevil from knowing the truth. One Piece does that from time to time, and we have a very similar situation with our next subject. Jewelry Bonnie, who is very potentially a clone of Charlotte Linlin. Now if you've never heard this before, this seems like an outlandish idea, and maybe it is. But more than a decade before all of this clone business became a legitimate possibility, Big Mom and Jewelry Bonnie were connected. What they have in common is that they are both pink-headed voracious eaters as well as lipstick enthusiasts, and in the manga the two even share the same eye color. This isn't true of the anime, where it was elected for reasons to make Bonnie's eyes purple, but whenever Oda colors Bonnie in the manga, which isn't very often at all, she has the same eye color as Big Mom. So that's 3 aesthetic similarities and 1 personality trait. That's not quite enough for me, so it's a good thing we have something else. Jewelry Bonnie's pirate ship, the Jewelry Margarita, looks like it was ripped straight out of Whole Cake Island, being constructed to depict food, which seems to be some sort of unholy combination of cake and or pizza. With all of this in mind, I think it's very easy to forgive theorists who back in the day thought that Bonnie was one of Big Mom's children. And I'm not entirely unconvinced that Oda may not have had that planned at some stage. And once we met all of the Charlotte siblings, this theory then rubber banded in the complete opposite direction, proposing that Bonnie was the grandmother or some kind of ancient old relative of Big Mom. Crazy, utterly crazy. But what we're left with today is just as insane, because Bonnie is having a secret withheld from her, which is definitely slightly pushing me in the direction that Bonnie may also be a clone, and with 2 Rocks Pirates clones already confirmed, I don't think it's at all out of the question to speculate that Jewelry Bonnie could be a clone of Charlotte Linlin. Although funnily enough, in her male form, Bonnie looks more like a clone of another emperor, a certain red-haired Shanks, or I guess in this case, pink-haired Shanks. I think the general idea makes sense. There are a few things to work out though, one of which is how Kuma comes into this whole business. Remembering that this whole clone endeavor was part of Dufeld's project, I'm sure that the world government would have been utterly horrified to discover that the Rocks Pirates were being cloned, and Bonnie may have been given to Kuma to keep her safe. It really fits the One Piece theme of found family, because very rarely are biological connections the center of emotion. But it could also explain why Bonnie doesn't take on the characteristics of whatever Kuma's special race is. And then you think back to events like post-war where Sakazuki captured Bonnie, and you begin to understand why he was ever so afraid of her. Because Bonnie holds the potential to become another Charlotte Linlin. And this world, quite frankly, does not possess the agricultural infrastructure to feed 2 of those. But there are 2 more things to tackle. One is that Bonnie, whilst very aesthetically similar, has not quite followed the physical path of Big Mom. We've seen an image of Bonnie as a child, and while she is practically inhaling all of the food around her, she does not possess Big Mom's child physique. With modern Bonnie, you can kind of get away with it because, yeah, Big Mom did have her skinny hot phase, but as a child, it's a little bit harder to explain. But a couple of options would be, 1, it's Bonnie's devil fruit. Perhaps she didn't want to look like a rotund pink wrecking ball as a child, and instead chose a distorted future as her permanent form. Or 2, Bonnie is actually a failed clone as well, running with the idea that they were unable to replicate Big Mom's naturally tough body, which may have something to do with the sizing. Other than that, the evidence standing against the Big Mom clone idea is the existence of Dowager Queen Connie, who also seems to possess the genetic ingredients to bake us a delicious Bonnie. This is probably the most difficult to overcome because there's no Occam's razor to rely on. Ideas need to get slightly more convoluted at this point, and I generally don't like that. But for example, perhaps Big Mom herself was originally from the Sorbet Kingdom. She could even have been the daughter of the then monarchy who was dumped on Elbaf by her relatively affluent-looking parents. And thus you maintain the genetic pool, but it also might provide Kuma a reason to raise Bonnie, because she is his family, but like a clone of his great aunt or something. But honestly, the biggest question of this whole exploration remains why? Just why? Why make clones of the crew that almost destabilize the entire planet? Well, this question has already been answered by Vegapunk in chapter 1072. His notes tell us that, even if the world doesn't agree, I know that she is a living, breathing person, a true and undeniable human being. It was a success, I am certain of it, and this is one great step towards the creation of world peace. So the idea here was to take the strongest force that had ever existed in the world, and then use that force to instead protect the world. And I guess also to ensure that they would have some defense in case the Rocks Pirates ever reformed. It's the same theory behind using the warlords to make the Seraphim. The world government is weaponizing the very power they fear, and from Vegapunk's perspective, this was all done for the sake of peace. I don't think anyone else really shared those ideals, certainly not the rest of Mads, and certainly not the world government. But to the aubergine scientist's credit, it may have worked. Stussy has recently revealed herself to be an agent of Vegapunk, and therefore also a force of general goodliness. Bonnie is also far more on the good scale than Big Mom ever was, although to be fair, most of that is due to the very naughty Chef Streusen. And as for Weevil, well, he's the most Seraphim of all, because he will literally do whatever he's told. With these clones, so far Vegapunk has quite successfully domesticated the Rocks Pirates. But then again, we still have yet to see the other attempts. Given that Kaido was caught and experimented on by Vegapunk, there could have been an attempt to clone him as well. Golden Lion Shiki, meanwhile, was also canonically caught and tossed into Impel Down, so there's an opportunity for clonage lurking around there as well. And after God Valley, it's possible that most, if not all, of the Rocks Pirates were caught, at least briefly, so Vegapunk could have access to the entire Rocks Pirates DNA buffet. Which of course brings us to the man himself, Rox D. Zebek. According to Sengoku, he has long since departed this world, but has Rox left behind a very unfortunate surprise? Because look, if I was a science man and I was trying to clone the Rocks Pirates, then surely the goal that I, science man, am trying to achieve lies within Rox himself. If you could make a good Rox who does all of the things you say, then surely the world is safe forever. Although the danger would be, what happens if you made another bad Rox? Perhaps a failed Rox clone who has some sort of biological quirk of being unable to sleep, or some sort of strange bodily chemistry that allows he and only he to consume multiple devil fruits. And what if this Rox clone were to join the crew of his former subordinate until he finally acquired the power and knowledge to complete his dream of taking over the world? Here are 3 One Piece theories that will keep you up at night. Because even though One Piece is your very typical, lovely, wacky, feel-good story, it does have a distinct element of dark and disturbing. And as it turns out, the more you dig, the more darker and more disturbing it gets. And so we're going to start with the demon possession theory. We have seen evidence of demons in One Piece not once, not twice, but thrice. And evidence of the afterlife in general is nothing new for the series. We even have the rather bold confirmation of the existence of souls, and we've even seen one passing away into the afterlife with Lao Ji. Or indeed, we've also seen souls return to the before the afterlife with Brook. So other realms do exist in One Piece, and as much as we have evidence of some sort of heaven, we also have evidence of some sort of hell. And there's no better place to start this than with the alleged King of Hell himself. The Straw Hat Swordsman, Roronoa Zoro, has been referred to as a demon ever since chapter 3 of the series, where Koby refers to him as a demon, which is what I just said. A demon in human form, to be precise. And at the time, this was taken as a bit of a Kobyism, he's a scared child, he exaggerates, he's a very timid little boy who soils his trousers at any sign of mild aggression. But then, as One Piece went on, Koby's words started to become scarily literal. Eni Sobi is a big turning point in Zoro's journey, which resulted in a brand new technique called Demon Aura 9 Sword Style. And there it is, and there's the word again. And how Zoro achieved growing an extra 4 arms, 2 heads, and even 6 swords has yet to be revealed. But that's not the only demonic oddity present in Eni Sobi. Something I very, very rarely see people talking about is during Eni Sobi when Zoro used a technique called Charming Demon Sleepless Night Onigiri. It seems to be a bit of a precursor to Ashura that allowed Zoro to create this illusion of his swords bending. And there's also the literal demon that appears behind him with glowing red eyes and such, which in the manga could be seen as a fun stylistic choice. Like when Zoro performed the very fun to say crab grab. When he did that, we saw a crab, but the crab wasn't literally there. Although with Charming Demon, the anime makes it seem much more like a literal presence, as if it's a big specter being conjured by Zoro. I will say that the anime often really plays up Zoro's demonic aspects. They make a lot of, how shall we say, creative choices, such as giving him this ominous aura or crimson red eyes, whereas a lot of these moments in the manga are just Zoro being a regular dude. There's a lot less demonicness in the manga. But I don't blame the anime, because the fact is that Zoro's existence remains thematically tied to dark concepts like curses, demons, hell, and even the Grim Reaper who popped up on Wano. Zoro also has a keen sense and taste for blood. And if this was the only time that something like this had happened, look, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But there are 2 others, and they're both much more convincing than Zoro. Our next demonic entity is Cavendish, or more accurately, Hakuba. The 2 have a very Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of situation happening, and this is a condition that's explained as a combination of 3 separate conditions, being narcolepsy, sleepwalking, and dissociative identity disorder, all coming together to create the illusion of a demonic presence taking control of Cavendish's body. And as cool as that is, I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, which is the principle that the simplest answer is most likely correct. And in this fictional pirate comic, the simplest answer is not necessarily the painstaking 3-combination medical condition one. In fact, that's almost like a desperate attempt to explain something much more obvious and much more disturbing. Hakuba could very well be a demon possessing Cavendish. When Hakuba is in control, Cavendish's face morphs. If you look at his eyes in particular, they contort to a completely different shape and occupy diagonal slices of his face. And whilst the eyes are almost always portrayed as stark white, there is one panel where Cavendish is trying to wrestle control away from Hakuba, and the Hakuba eye color is different from Cavendish's natural eye color. So I've been told that my eyes can change from blue to gray depending on the day and the lighting, but this is something else. What happens is a light switch effect where Cavendish completely loses who he is. He becomes a soulless entity with a single mission, which is to cut slice as many people as possible before returning to blissful sleep. Demonic is really the only way to describe it, and he's not even the most terrifying one. That would be Charlotte Linlin. And remember what I said about Zoro and how the anime tends to stylize him with all of the glowing red eyes and such that wasn't necessarily in the manga? Well, with Charlotte Linlin in the manga, that's not even up for debate, because the manga flat out gives her these glowing eyes whenever she's in a hunger state. This isn't a stylistic anime choice. These glowing, sinister eyes, they're actually happening. And Charlotte Linlin was not born an evil person. As a child, she was as innocent and as lovely as you could hope. All she wanted to do was live happily with her assorted friends and eat lots and lots of nice food. But then, in certain moments, a switch flips that completely changes her personality into what I can only describe as a demon. An insatiable, rampaging entity determined to consume anything and everything. It's very similar to Cavendish's affliction, however it gets triggered under different conditions. With Big Mom, it's about hunger, and with Cavendish, it's about fatigue. So these states unfortunately respond to very basic human needs that we all need to do, and so it can't ever be prevented. prevented. Very bad news for them, and also very bad news for everyone around them. However, it does give us a clue as to what they may be. There is this idea that the demons in One Piece could be based on the 7 deadly sins, because you've got the obvious with Big Mom being gluttony, and then we also have Cavendish, who could be a very passable sloth, emerging in response to sleep, and with Zoro, I dare say that pride would be a pretty solid contender for his affliction. Each of these characters, regardless of demonic presence, represents the pinnacle of their respective sin, and that could be because of a presence inside of them that has manifested at multiple points now in One Piece. And it could also mean that there are 4 other demons out there that we have yet to discover. Or who knows, maybe Big Mom got unlucky and has the lust demon as well. Hence all of the intercourse resulting in all of the children. So that's the demon possession theory. But now we're going to move on to something much more disturbing, because this next idea is completely man-made. This is the Bridge of Purgatory theory, which begins with recognizing that the One Piece world is full of amazing feats of engineering, especially for a planet theoretically stuck in the age of piracy. There are so many mega structures that boggle the mind, such as Fishman Island, but there is one structure that dwarfs even entire islands, and that is Tequila Wolf, a bridge that has been under construction for the last 700 years and is so unfathomably long that currently we don't know where it starts or indeed where it's intended to end, or even if it's ever intended to end. This bridge is so big that it has the status of being its own nation, and as you can imagine, it's bigger than the vast majority of nations within the actual One Piece world. My favorite image for showing just how stupidly large the bridge is would be this one where Robin is being escorted by the Revolutionary Army after having been freed, and you can barely even see their cart traveling along this colossal structure, and this is just a tiny piece of it. But also, this bridge is so large that it contains ancient ruins from various time periods when the bridge itself was being built, and whilst Robin was there, she passed through a construction site from over 300 years ago. So the obvious question is, what is the purpose of this bridge? And immediately, I suppose it evokes the vanity project of some world noble who wanted to make his mark on history, sort of like the pyramids or something. But one idea is that the bridge has a much more logical purpose, designed to span and connect the entire world in order to make travel and trade a lot easier. One bridge that could take you to all of the blues and even the Grand Line and the New World. And some very ambitious thinkers have also proposed that this could be the beginning of another red line, the skeleton of a new red line, the foundation of a much larger project designed to separate the world. And I don't buy so much into that one, but in regards to connecting the world, whilst it would be revolutionary for concepts like trade and freedom, that's not really what the world government is in the business of doing. And I think the explanation is much simpler and much more horrifying. Something that's always stuck with me is how Bunny Joe described the bridge. The celestial dragons ordered it built. Its purpose isn't important. Countless slaves have perished in its construction. Nothing will change that. Now, I understand that this was Bunny Joe speaking from his perspective. He doesn't care why Tequila Wolf was being built. He just cares about all of the suffering that went into it. And would you look at that? I think that Bunny Joe has something in common with the world government, because I don't think they care about why the bridge is being built either. The really dark undertones of Tequila Wolf is that it's designed to be more of a prison than a project. This is a location that slaves are sent to in order to work, and there is no greater purpose for that work. The world government are just doing this because they can. They've purposely selected a project that can never be completed in a very Sisyphean sort of way, which is the story of Sisyphus being forced to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll all the way back down, rinse and repeat for all eternity. So that's why all of the camps left in ruin, because the bridge serves no purpose. There's no reason to clear them. It's exactly the sort of thing that the world nobles would conjure. They have practically unlimited resources to pump into the bridge, and it serves as a sickening endless purgatory for them to punish their slaves for all eternity. And even in the case where, say, another 700 years down the line, the bridge does get finished, you know what the world nobles would do then? They'd destroy it and tell the slaves to start over. Or even worse, they might have 2 groups of slaves functioning at any given time. One group to construct the bridge and one to simultaneously deconstruct it, so that the bridge will be an eternal project that can never be completed, just like Sisyphus and the boulder. I really don't think this bridge serves a purpose greater than torture. It's a living hell that the world nobles were able to use as a threat and also as a source of entertainment. It is the one location in the world where its inhabitants are stripped of absolutely everything, freedom and reason, and that is the never-ending Bridge of Purgatory. Not an amazing place to be, but our next theory is also spawned from the mind of a man, or at least that's the current idea. Chapter 1069 revolutionized devil fruit thinking in a very dangerous way through Vegapunk's current devil fruit theory. Every devil fruit is a possibility for human evolution that someone desired. If only I could be like this, if only I could be like that. All of these powers represent the many branches of the future of humanity. But that unnatural status is loathed by the sea, the mother of nature, a fitting punishment for its sin. Those with powers exist in different dimensions dreamed up by someone else before them. This is my only theory. Literally the biggest mind in the world who has been studying fictional fruit for years, decades I guess. All that time, and he only has this one theory. And as much as Vegapunk says these words with a sense of amazement and wonder of an objective scientist, it also comes with some very unpleasant realities. This is the Dark Desires theory, and it starts by making the link that all devil fruits were developed in response to desire, which regardless of which method is taken was probably true, if it was magically willed into existence or a meticulously crafted endeavor of science. And there are those with what we'll call pure desires, like wanting to make people smile. There are those with questionable desires, like covering themselves in mucus. Not amazing, but ultimately harmless for everyone except them. And then there are those with desires that are simply evil. For example, if Sugar's Hobby Fruit was to be the subject of this theory, then it means that someone in the past had a very specific desire to enslave people, but not like our usual form of slavery. No. This brand of slavery came with an extra macabre twist, because the originator of this fruit wanted to play with people like toys. And they even baked eternal youth into the fruit's abilities to ensure that they would be able to play with their toys for as long as they wanted. I really don't think there's a positive interpretation we can give to this fruit like we can with some others, because there are innocent fruits that can be used for evils, like say Charlotte Smoothie's Shibo powers. I reckon that this was born out of a pure desire to just drink some juice, but it had evil applications, and Smoothie puts it to use creating torture bars, where her guests are served the tangible, liquidy life force of her victims. Again, the creator was probably just really thirsty that day and really wanted a quicker way to get some juice. Or a kinder version of the Hobby fruit would be Tama's devil fruit, which embodies the innocent desire of wanting to be friends with animals, which can result in arguable slavery, but within the power structure of the fruit, eventually the animal in question is given the free will to choose what it wants to do. With the Hobby fruit though, the rules are quite specific in that the user needs to create a contract with the toy slaves. It's disturbingly well thought out on a legislative level and can only be the creation of someone who had bad intent for its use. And I would say the same for the Sorosoro fruit, someone who had a specific desire to manipulate the souls of others and control their lifespan to create, once again, a series of slaves to do their bidding. So much slavery in this video. And even something like the Memo fruit can be taken in a dark direction. This was the product of someone with a strong desire to manipulate others through their memories. And given all this talk on Egghead Island about how a person's memories may very well constitute life itself, memory manipulation isn't exactly a light transgression. And all of this is before we even consider the Yami no Mi, which is the subject of a bit of a controversial translation. In English, Blackbeard states that this is said to be the most dangerous power in the history of devil fruits. However, in the original Japanese, this can also be translated as evil, as in the most evil power in the history of devil fruits. Not the only evil power, the most evil. And just as a side note, one of the first attacks that Blackbeard uses with this devil fruit is rather appropriately named Liberation, which draws a lovely dark parallel to Luffy's ability to become the warrior of liberation. So for every good intention, there is an equal and opposite bad intention. That's what this devil fruit theory is telling us, which has some pretty deep implications for the Will of D. If the fruits were created by this ancient kingdom, then it would indicate that they weren't exactly the unfortunate victims of the world government that we currently suspect, and that perhaps there may be a very good reason why at least some of them are considered to be demons and enemies of the gods. What really strikes me about Vegapunk's theory though is that he is a man of science, the biggest of all of the sciencemen, and even he still believes in a supernatural element. He specifically mentions the sea, the mother of nature, and implies that these alternate paths for humanity are sins against it. He genuinely believes that there is a greater force out there that even he cannot explain. Either way, devil fruits are not objective concepts. Each one of them comes with a degree of inherited will. Their users are living out the wildest dreams of those who originally conjured them, and to many, a lot of those dreams would resemble our worst nightmares. But to steer clear of nightmares, I would recommend subscribing to this channel for consistent injections of sweet, lovely One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feeds. This will blow you! away. In chapter 1096, a vacationing monkey D. Garp is informed of the impending God Valley incident. Garp then chastises the Marines for messing with Hachinosu, specifically mentioning a stolen treasure. However, this gets lost in English translation, but the more accurate translation is not treasure, but crown jewel, with the word jewel being horsiki, which is spelled with the kanji for rock. Rock being the name of the Rocksteady Zebek guy, and due to the way that L's and R's function in Japanese, that crown jewel could just as easily be a clown jewel. And interestingly, a certain Buggy the Clown just so happened to be born in the exact same year of the God Valley incident. Around the same time that clown jewel was stolen by the Marines, and after the defeat of Rocks, Buggy ended up on the vessel of Goldie Roger alongside baby Shanks, masterfully hinting that Buggy the Clown is the child of Rocksteady Zebek, and that crown jewel is actually a clown rock. Or not. I just thought that would be a fun way to start the video. Absolutely everything I just said there, ridiculous. Everything with the exception of one very real possibility, that Buggy could be the son of Rocksteady Zebek. Let me give you the real evidence. It's not because of the ridiculous language reasoning that One Piece theorists tend to lean far too much into, and often take advantage of your probably lack of Japanese knowledge, but it's because of three very real fictional things that have happened in One Piece that directly connect Buggy to Rocksteady Zebek. The first of which is an uncomfortably close correlation of ambition. I often bring up Buggy's foreshadowing, where he's stating that he'll become one of the 4 emperors, which he did, and then the Pirate King, which he may very well do. However, I often neglect that during Marineford, Buggy made a third and even bigger declaration. When the gates of justice miraculously open as Buggy raises his arms, he thinks to himself, "Is it the will of heaven that I become king?" Which at first I thought could be referring to Buggy's previous Pirate King thought. However, when Whitebeard asks Buggy for an alliance, this is where the true thought becomes clear, because he says, "I actually think I can do it now. I can do it. I can see it now. I'm gonna be king of the world," which at the time we just wrote off as some, classic Buggy comedy. However, in chapter 975, Sengoku informed us about the desires of Rocksteady Zebek. The ambition of their Captain Rocks was to be king of the world. However it came about, and however differently they plan on implementing it, Buggy has the same ambition as Rocks. Which does sound a bit generic, but it's actually not in One Piece. People don't tend to say king of the world, because most are really gunning for Pirate King. And I have to say, Buggy's doing a mighty fine job of enacting this desire as well. Buggy is currently causing more chaos for the world government than any emperor due to Cross Guild's competitive marine bounty system. For the first time that we know of, there's a monetary incentive to kill or capture marines. So that is essentially declaring war on the world government. I dare say a very Roxian maneuver. And Buggy has also had this obsession with obtaining Captain John's treasure. Captain John being a former member of the Rocks Pirates, whose corpse we met on Thriller Bark, which is a cool little side plot that gets weaved into pre-time skip One Piece. In chapter 522, Eldon Yon is reading a newspaper, and if you zoom in, you can see a photo of Buggy, because what this article is reporting is his arrest while searching for the treasure of Captain John, which he did assumedly find later when Luffy gave Buggy Captain John's treasure marker, which was the armband that he acquired on Thriller Bark. And Eldon Yon, of course, being Gloriosa, who was also a member of the Rocks Pirates, so look, mate, this Buggy can't seem to get away from these naturally occurring solid mass or aggregate of minerals that are the Rocks Pirates. And something that I love is that Buggy's crew are almost like a parody of the Rocks Pirates, with Alvida being kind of the reverse Big Mom. She started out large and then slimmed down, and both of them go through their cowboy hat phases. And really, Alvida is what happens if Big Mom and Kaido had a child together, because she also uses that big old club. But Buggy's 100 Beast Kaido is actually Moji the Beast Tamer, and you even have his lion Richie standing in for Golden Lion Shiki. And as for Kabaji, well, he doesn't really fit in, so I'm just going to employ my usual life strategy of ignoring him. Mr. 3 also doesn't fit, but that doesn't matter, because all of this is a joke. However, this joke has slowly been turning into a reality, because we also have the Impel Down prisoners, and none of these pirates have ever been named, but they were strong enough for even Whitebeard to recognize that they would be a massive problem to deal with, very much reflecting the original residents of Hachinosu, known as the most vicious and powersome of pirates who all fought for the right to join Rocks' crew. And really, the founding of Cross Guild is the closest thing we have to a New Age Rocks Pirates, combining all of these legendary figures who are typically either solo agents or heads of their own organization, and bringing them all under the decadent circus tent of Buggy. Cross Guild even have a very disgruntled Rocks Pirate-esque dynamic. The trio of Buggy, Mihawk, and Crocodile all kind of despise each other and despise the fact that they've been brought together by fate. But we should also examine Buggy's mysterious origins, because this is a big one. At this point in the series, Buggy is a genuinely more mysterious character than Shanks. We now know more about Shanks' origins than we do Buggy's. So Buggy and Shanks are both 39 years old, meaning that both of them were born just before the God Valley incident 38 years ago. For the record, Shanks is slightly older, having been born on the 9th of March, and Buggy was born on the 8th of August. And both of these dates are numerical puns for the respective characters, as Shanks' birthday is the closest you can get to pronouncing his name, with the numbers being Sun Q, and Buggy's birthday can be said as Barabara, which is of course the name of his devil fruit. Also, an even bigger side note here, Oda didn't even choose Shanks' birthday. It was picked for him by a reader who suggested it, and that same reader also decided Boa Hancock's birthday. But other than birthdays, we know pretty much nothing about Buggy. We don't even know his full name, if in fact Buggy is his real name. The only other thing we know is that according to the One Piece Vivia Card databook, Buggy was born in the Grand Line. We don't know when he joined Roger's crew, although for whatever reason the One Piece wiki says that Buggy joined when he was 9 years old, but this is inaccurate. 9 years old is just the earliest point in time that we've seen Buggy with the Roger Pirates. But both Shanks and Buggy being the same age is very important, because it means that the Roger Pirates could very well have sailed away from God Valley with 2 babies instead of just one, being baby Shanks, who they found in a plundered treasure chest. Speaking of, it's heavily implied that Shanks is a member of the Figerland family, the current patriarch of which is Figerland Garling. That's going to be relevant in a second, but for now, the idea goes as follows. On God Valley, notorious bad man Rox Diesebek was beaten and the Rox Pirates were fractured and disbanded. However, during his time on this planet, Rox managed to make a deposit of man ore into the mine of a willing participant, who may or may not have been a literal clown woman, which ended up producing Buggy. And after the Rox Pirates disbanded, there was no one left to take care of this Buggy. So he ended up on Roger's ship, although exactly how can be a bit difficult to explain. A simple way of explaining it would be that even at an age before speech was possible, Buggy was enamored by the idea of treasure and found his way into the same pile of treasure chests that baby Shanks did. And really, they could have been having their very own episode of Rugrats whilst the God Valley incident was in full swing. Another idea I've seen proposed is that Buggy was purposely left on God Valley and rescued by the Marines, very specifically Garp. And we all know Garp's feelings about the sins of the father and all that, but knowing that the world government wouldn't take too kindly to Buggy should they discover that he's the son of the man who almost destroyed their entire system, Garp handed Buggy to his old rival Roger. A maneuver that would later come full circle when Roger delivered his own child to Garp to do the same in his absence, thus continuing the string of child leapfrogging. Rox died, so Roger raised his child, then Roger died, so Garp raised his child. Which would also tell us why Roger was ever so confident that Garp would raise Ace, because Garp owed Roger a big parental favor, although most of Garp's responsibility was dumped onto miscellaneous bandits and the megafauna of the Goa Kingdom. It is a bit admittedly convoluted, but so is any Buggy origin story, no matter how mundane it may be. Somehow Roger had to be okay with a child boarding his ship from the age of 0 to 9. Which, Shanks aside, because that was an accident that they ended up with, Roger is not generally okay with. He doesn't just pick up any old kid keen on a bit of yar and me hearties, which we saw on Zo, when an absolutely adorable little Pedro begged to join Roger's crew, but Roger declined and said that everyone gets their time to shine, which would go on to happen, just unfortunately when Pedro was at the center of a very shiny explosion. The bigger point is that you can't just take random kids. Roger needed a reason, ideally a good reason, to let Buggy become a permanent member of his crew. And the potential of a Will of D lineage is a pretty damn good one. And it also sets up the potentially fun dynamic of Buggy and Shanks. You have the child of a world noble and a child of the greatest threat to the world nobles being raised together on the same vessel. It is a recipe for forbidden comedy. And Buggy and Shanks always fighting is that poetic continuation of the idea that the Will of D are the enemies of the gods, and there can be no peace between the child of a world noble and the child of a D clan member. And even though he's never stated to be a D, like Luffy and like Blackbeard, Buggy is a clear subject of fate. And fate, I have to say, is doing a lot of heavy lifting with Buggy. Luffy and Blackbeard are at least able to pull their own weight from time to time, and Buggy actually shares a pretty ridiculous amount of similarities to Luffy, having both followed the path from nobodies at Orangetown to full-blown emperorhood at roughly the same pace. However, something that very much gets overlooked about Buggy is that he has Luffy's most dangerous ability as identified by Draco Mihawk. It's not his powers or techniques. He possesses some quality that makes people want to help him, and in these waters, that is the most formidable power of all. That's what Mihawk said about Luffy. Everywhere Luffy goes, he makes new allies, but everywhere Buggy goes, he makes new allies as well. On the island with Gaimon, man, at sea with Alvida, and even the prisoners of Impel Down. And Buggy's ability is so formidable that these days even Mihawk himself has reluctantly succumbed to this, which if anything is a big one-up on Luffy. Ah, Straw Hat, I see you've recruited a man who wants to become the world's greatest swordsman. Well, I, Clown, have skipped that step and just recruited the world's greatest swordsman. If you look at Buggy's crew, he's even gathered his members one at a time over a lot of time, just like Luffy. And then there's this line about Rocksteezebek. He was Roger's first foe, and perhaps his greatest. And all jokes aside, that very much applies to Luffy and Buggy. Yeah, Luffy fought Alvida and Morgan before Buggy, but Buggy was the first villain to come back into Luffy's life and truly earned that title of foe. In fact, Buggy has almost killed Luffy on 2 occasions now. One when he was trapped in the cage at Orangetown, and then Buggy got even closer on the execution platform of Logtown. Not many other villains can claim that, so Buggy certainly is a great destined foe. And whilst you know the word greatest may not necessarily apply here, that's not how history is going to remember Buggy. Now that he's an emperor, you can be sure that all sorts of stories are spreading about Luffy and Buggy's legendary battle at Orangetown, a conflict that threatened to destroy not just the town, but the entirety of the East Blue. And Buggy's potential lineage also makes the current makeup of the 4 emperors very interesting. You've got Shanks, the man who was raised by Roger. Then next to him there's Luffy, the man who inherited Roger's will. Alongside that we have Buggy, the son of Rocksteezebek. And rounding things out with a very big tummy, we have Blackbeard, the man who inherited the will of Rocksteezebek. Either way, the path to the top of this world is rife with nepotism. In Buggy's case, we'd just be adding another layer. Nepotism being another one of those features that Luffy just excels at. What, being born from the world's most wanted man, having a grandfather who's the most legendary marine to have ever lived, along with the inherited will of the Pirate King, and even having been directly mentored by Shanks. Buggy needs to catch up. Currently, all he has to his pedigree is being the quote blood brother of Shanks and being raised by the Pirate King. Adding in being the biological son of Rocks is exactly what Buggy needs to take that final step and make everyone both love and fear him that much more. So up until now, I've been considering that Buggy's existence as kind of like the comical parody of Rocks, but we've just been assuming that Rocks was this all-powerful Giga Chad capable of corralling your white beards and your big mothers, but we don't know that. As disappointing as it may sound at this stage, there is nothing to say that Rocks wasn't the Buggy of his generation. A comic relief character who stumbled his way into almost ruling the world, and of course carried by a legion of powerful people behind him. I mean, just think about when the Cross Guild legend is going to be told 50 years from now, people aren't going to have any context about who Buggy actually was. All they're going to know is that he's the man who united Sir Crocodile, Dracula Mihawk, and thousands of other pirates under his Jolly Roger. Whether they're related or not, Buggy is going to be remembered in the same vein as Rocks. In fact, even more so, because he'll actually be remembered by history instead of being erased. Rocksteezebek was Goldie Roger's first rival, and Buggy was Luffy's first rival. And together they went on to gain power and infamy, and are ultimately destined to clash to decide the fate of the world. To be clear, this is just an idea, a probably stupid idea, but everything about Buggy was at some stage a stupid idea. If you went back to the days of Marineford and genuinely argued that Buggy would become an emperor, then you'd be laughed straight out of Clowntown. But he proved us all wrong. He went and did it. There's just something about Buggy that means you can never underestimate or dismiss an idea surrounding him, no matter how absurd. And being the son of Rocks is far from the worst Buggy theory I've heard. Oh, and also, just as one more little bonus hint from the author himself, in chapter 1082, when Buggy is speaking to his forces, if you zoom in on the man with the axe, there is a tattoo on his arm which says Rocks, potentially hinting at Buggy's secret lineage. But it would also mean that this particular crew member, for whatever reason, asked his tattoo artist to draw the word upside down, assumedly so that we, the viewers, could gaze upon it gloriously at this very moment. So that's quite some future sight that man with axe had. But you let me know in the comments, what do you think of Buggy being the son of Rocks? And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. Sakazuki has a daughter and her name is Hibari. But also, Hibari has a boyfriend and his name is Koby. But also, again, Koby has a superior officer who once genuinely tried to kill him and his name is Sakazuki. So what we have happening here is the world's most dangerous menage a trois, which means household of 3 and doesn't always mean the sex thing. All right, we need to slow right down, because a lot of people are startlingly unaware of the connection between Sakazuki and Hibari. So let me explain. The moment that Hibari was introduced into the series, a connection was made to Sakazuki because in Japanese, they both speak with a Hiroshima dialect. I'm not going to try and explain what that sounds like. Instead, I'll give the English equivalent, because in the Viz manga, this gets translated into, I guess, redneck, and so Hibari's dialogue ends up sounding like this. I'm begging you to, sir. Captain Koby's done so much for me. So in English, Hibari does actually speak with a very thick accent, like whatever that was that I just did. But you wouldn't immediately make the connection, because Sakazuki doesn't speak with that sort of thick accent in English. They make him sound much more like a generic American, a generican, if you will. But in Japanese, the similarity is much more striking, and Sakazuki's accent has even caused hilarity in the SBS segments, with one reader asking Oda, in One Piece movie Gold, Sakazuki tells Rob Lucci, "You've become much more erotic." What does he mean by erotic? A very valid question, to which Oda responds, "Day after day, people become more erotic, and our Lucci-san is no different." In that scene, it seems Sakazuki has seen Rob Lucci appearing rather erotically on a magazine. So he asked him, "Can you lend me an issue? I've always thought that was a powerful scene." And then there's a brief pause before the following outburst. He said heroic. You've become much more heroic is what he meant. But the most important thing to note is that Sakazuki and Hibari are literally the only two characters in One Piece who speak with this particular dialect. Again, in English terms, it's not, I guess, redneck common. It's like a very specific branch of hillbilly that can be localized right down to the suburb. But look, that could be coincidental. It almost certainly isn't. But luckily, this is by far the weakest piece of evidence we have for the Hibari-Sakazuki connection. And this is where most people stop because they dare not dig too deeply. But I have dug deeply into the realm of One Piece spin-off series, which is a very dangerous world, because you can stumble onto stuff like Chin Piece, which is One Piece where all of the characters don't wear pants and Luffy literally fights with his rubber man bits. I mean, yes, I own a copy of it. Why, you ask? Morbid curiosity. And I'll make a video about it one day, I'm sure, and it is on that day when you can officially tell me that I've run out of ideas. But it is not this day. That aside, the spin-off manga series are not to be slept on because they do occasionally have a very real impact on the canon story. Like, say, introducing new characters that go on to be made official characters. But an actual great example of a One Piece spin-off manga is One Piece Academy. One Piece Academy is an official spin-off alternate universe manga by Sohei Koji, where our main cast attends New World Middle School, which is described as a place of education for criminals and wicked folk, with most of the young pirates and marines in the series appearing as students, with the teachers being the much older, more established characters in the One Piece world. One of which is the third-year student affairs manager, Mr. Akainu, and he's introduced being informed of an infamous student who was returned to the academy by the name of Hattori Hyota, who turns out to be Rob Lucci in a very bad disguise, and his mission is to infiltrate the students and do bad things, just like how he was sent to infiltrate Water 7. The general idea of One Piece Academy is to loosely, and I mean very loosely, adapt One Piece into a gag high school manga, but these things also work in reverse, because when Oda finds something that he likes in non-canon media, he has a bit of a tendency to go, I'ma take that and put it into my One Piece for fun. One great example of this is of course Uta from film Red. The film itself isn't canon, but Oda enjoyed the character so much that Uta does exist in One Piece, or perhaps I should say did exist. Whether she's alive or not is very vague because she's only appeared as a single silhouette. But then there's also the infamous story of Vice Admirals Momo Usagi and Chaton. These characters were made by fans who asked Oda in an SBS segment when the Admirals Pink Rabbit and Brown Pig were going to appear. And to that Oda replied, now, they're canon now. But there is a third very poignant and relevant to the video example of this. All the way back in 2018, a spin-off manga was published that no one in the West has read because no one cares about it, and it is called One Piece Kobyama Who Looks Like Koby to Peace in a Pod. That is the very long and very real title of a 3-volume spin-off manga starring Kobyama, a junior high school student who looks exactly like Koby from One Piece, because One Piece exists in this world as fictional media, but Kobyama has never seen or read it, so he's hilariously unaware of his striking similarity to Koby. And unlike most spin-off manga, this one doesn't feature an insane amount of characters constantly taking the stage. It's a much more pared back story that focuses on a handful of characters. One of those being the original character Akaishi Madoka, a girl who becomes obsessed with Kobyama because she reads One Piece, and she knows about Koby's Water 7 glow-up, so you could call her something of an early investor. She is banking on Kobyama making the same physical transformation. And you may have guessed this by her name, Akaishi, which literally translates as red stone, but she is the daughter of this world's Akainu, whose name is Akaishi Papa. And he is one of my favorite characters in any One Piece spin-off, because this is what happens if you turn Sakazuki into a regular old dad guy. He's quite emotive, he loves his daughter, and he does that classic Japanese slapstick thing of sticking his butt into the air. He has everything. And it presents a really fun dynamic, where Sakazuki's daughter is in love with Koby, a dynamic that I am convinced that Oda turned into Hibari. That or Madoka was supposed to be a gender-bent Helmeppo, but probably and hopefully not. But the reason why I accuse Oda of stealing this is because Kobayama, again, was published in 2018, and Hibari's first appearance wasn't until 2022. And I do think that she would have been incorporated earlier, except around that 2018-2019 time period is when the manga steered head-on into Wano, and there really wasn't a lot of room to do stuff outside of that setting. But Oda threw Hibari in at the first available moment in chapter 1061. And the visual similarities to Akechi Madoka are pretty immediately apparent. Yes, there is a slight difference in style, but this can be explained as Madoka being a pre-time skip incarnation of Hibari. So just like how Koby has had his glow up, Madoka has now had hers. And also she's now named Hibari. But the most striking element about Hibari is of course her clear obsession with Koby, which just like Kobayama mostly plays out from a distance. Hibari has very much yet to reveal her feelings and has been generally supporting Koby from a distance as a sniper. And what this makes me think is that in the manga metaverse, Akechi Madoka eventually tracked down Eiichiro Oda and forced him to insert a character that looks like her to be Koby's love interest, in the hopes that fiction would continue to inform the reality of her world. Here's a question though. As we've explored, Oda has included non-canon characters in the series before, but he didn't change any of their names. So if this was meant to be Sakazuki's daughter, then why not just keep her original name Madoka? Well, that's because Oda found a much better name. So it's a pretty well-known fact that most marine women are named after birds, such as Tashigi, Suru, Kujaku, etc. So immediately the name Madoka doesn't quite fit into the established theming. I mean, it might. I don't know all Japanese birds, maybe there is one. But what I do know for a fact is that Hibari does fit, because that is the Japanese name for the Eurasian skylark. However, Hibari is also the name of a flower, specifically a pink rose made via crossbreeding in Hiroshima of all places. You know, the one where both Hibari and Sakazuki's dialect comes from. And if pink rose sounds in any way familiar to you, that's because Sakazuki wears a Hibari on his suit at all times, which we see both pre-time skip and post-time skip. So even though Hibari probably wasn't planned from the moment that Sakazuki was introduced, and is very likely inspired by Madoka from Kobayama, it worked out pretty absurdly perfectly. Though we have this name lying around right on Sakazuki's chest there, right over his heart, which also happens to be a type of bird to tie into the female marine naming scheme. And to add to this, Hibari herself also has a strong connection to flowers. Hibari fights using Vegapunk's flower technology that turns enemy gunpowder into flowers and thus neutralizes all of their firepower. An invention that we saw Vegapunk win the Ebel Peace Prize for during the Germa 66 cover story flashback. And this is why I say it's 99% confirmed that Hibari is Sakazuki's daughter, because it's all out there, we just need Oda to actually say it. And I'm all for it, because I think it would add a lot to Sakazuki as a character. Because right now, what I'm picturing, right, is him making a vow to protect his daughter from the horrors that he experienced as a child, and perhaps even the horror that robbed Hibari's mother from this world. Because let's be real, if you make the decision to become a mother in One Piece, then you've just shortened your average lifespan by 4 to 5 decades. And that might be the origin of Sakazuki's pirate hatred. Some ne'er-do-well attacked his island one day and murdered his wife, leaving Sakazuki as a single father determined to protect his precious Hibari. And that's also why absolute justice is the only solution for him. He's not willing to take any risks whatsoever, because back in the day when it was okay to take risks, his wife was stolen from him. And that is not happening with Hibari. And to remind himself of why he's doing all of the things it is he does, Sakazuki wears a Hibari on the left side of his suit, again over his heart, to always show how much he loves and cares for her. I believe Sakazuki also has various tattoos on his chest and arm that look like Hibari flowers, and if so, this could end up being very sad. But if this is the case, then I don't think it's coincidental for Hibari to have gone in the direction of becoming a sniper. Someone who generally doesn't get placed right in the midst of active combat, and also someone who fights using non-lethal methods. It's almost as if Sakazuki desperately wants to preserve her innocence. Like, Hibari is that ideal world that he's fighting for, which isn't a world that he can live in because of all of the bad things he's done, but she is the future he envisions. Hibari in general is also a little bit infantilized with her design and personality. For example, she wears these incredibly vibrant pants that look like the kind of thing you'd see painted on the walls of a kindergarten facility. There's also also the cute hearts on her rifle sash, and she carries a backpack with a particularly adorable bear charm. And this charm actually has a story behind it, which Oda revealed in the SBS of volume 107. That bear is a lucky charm that Hibari treasures from when she was little. At one time, her life was saved by Koby in a battlefield, but she lost the bear. A few days later, Koby was injured and severely told off by a superior, but in Koby's hand was the bear. He had returned to the battlefield and searched for Hibari's treasure. Hibari was crying and grateful. She secretly names the bear Kopi-senpai. I'm quite dense, so I don't know if she's head over heels for him or not. That last part there is Oda refusing to own up to writing anything romantic. For most of its run, he's had a strict no romance policy in One Piece, with some lapses here and there, like that time that Sanji almost got married to a pudding. But here's how I see the bear incident, right? It's a charm that Hibari has had since she was a child. So chances are it was either Sakazuki or Mamazuki who gave it to her. And I'm imagining a situation where after Koby returned it to her, Hibari got home and told her daddy all about it, to which he was thoroughly unamused. And that could explain why Sakazuki was so prepared to kill that Koby during the Paramount War. The situation goes like this, right? Koby stands up and defies him, a Marine Admiral, and it's all like, first you seduce my daughter with your bear shenaniganry, and now you're standing in the way of me killing some bad dudes. No, my dude, you are the bad dude. And then Shanks swept in to save the love of Hibari's life as well as Koby's life in general. But also there's an incredibly adorable moment when Sword comes to rescue Koby on Hachinosu, and mid-battle Hibari says, listen, don't take this the wrong way, but if you're hungry, I packed a lunch for you. Oh, actually, I should do that in the Viz accent. Listen, don't go taking this the wrong way, but if you're hungry, I packed a lunch for you. We do have another question to answer though. If Hibari is Sakazuki's daughter, then how is she completely nothing like him at all ever? And to that I would say that's just One Piece. One of its primary themes is found family. So we very commonly find ourselves in situations where children are the polar opposites of their parents. For example, we have 3 generations of monkeys now? And not one of them have even come close to following in their parents' footsteps. Garp, the hero of the Marines, produced Dragon, the politically motivated enemy of the world, who produced Luffy, who doesn't care about anything and just wants to F off and have a fun adventure. It's not just Luffy though, the same is true of many characters. Sanji's father was a king and Sanji became a cook. Nami's mother was a Marine and she became a pirate. Chopper's parents were reindeer and he became a human. And Frankie's parents were pirates, so he became a pirate as well. It doesn't always work, but usually it's pretty sound. And it's something that I really love about One Piece. I often think that it can be very lazy writing to just have a child be a miniature version of the parent, as happens in a ton of media. And I mean, it's not that it's unrealistic. That does happen in real life. Sometimes kids do emulate their parents. But I should point out that there is one piece of evidence that may stand in the way of this theory, and it does so completely alone. But it's the counter theory that Sakazuki is impotent, which was caused by the scanned translation of chapter 1113, where Saint J. Garcia Saturn accused Sakazuki of being a, quote, impotent fool, which many people on the internet took hilariously seriously, as if Saturn is just exposing the problems with his fleet admiral's sex life at a time like this. But to be fair, the official Viz translation added fuel to the fire by having Saturn accuse Sakazuki of being a soft man. But look, I believe in the seed of Sakazuki, and I can definitely see him being the only admiral father. I mean, just look at his contemporaries. Kizaru, he's got no chance. No one wants to be stuck in the purgatory of relentless middle management, and Kuzan's best opening line to women is, here's another sexy lady with super bazongas. Are you free tonight? But as alluded to before, I can also see quite a heartbreaking story incoming, because at the moment it seems like Hibari is Sakazuki's everything. He sees himself as the hero protecting her from the world. But now Hibari has grown up and she sees Koby as her hero. Dad's not cool anymore, and not just not cool, but a blatant genocidal maniac. Sakazuki is irredeemable. He has killed far too many people and caused one too many genocides to be narratively capable of becoming a protagonist. However, he could have a moment to generate some feels, where by the end of his justice campaign, he has a chat with his daughter and realizes that the real justice was there all along, or some shit, I don't know. He'll realize that he took the wrong path and do something of good for the sake of his beloved daughter. Perhaps a grand sacrifice to pave the way for the dawn of the world, and then at the very very end of One Piece, we'll see Sakazuki's grave, and Hibari will lay a single flower for her father to rest in maybe relative peace, knowing that the world is now just. Really, that's the way it has to end, because otherwise we're gonna have a lot of awkward family holidays. I imagine it being like that steamed hams episode of The Simpsons, where Skinner is cooking for Superintendent Chalmers, except in this case it is Koby cooking for Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, and it's gonna be awkward, very awkward, so awkward that Sakazuki is gonna wish he was dead. And thus we wrap back around to the original ending. But you let me know what you think. What are your thoughts on this whole daughter business? And whatever those happen to be, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.